Hello, everybody. 12 o'clock on the dot, my time. 10 a.m. for some of you folks, maybe a little earlier for some others or later, but welcome wherever you are. And thank you so much for joining us. It's nice to see all the attendees to my right. Recognize several of your names. Some are newer, but either way, welcome for being here. Today we have our Epicor User Summit. So I'm very excited to have some of these speakers with us today, or not speakers, but presenters. They're going to be going over some tips, tricks, and whatnot, and spilling some beans for free, so to speak. But we're really happy again that you can be here. We're going to be having questions at the end. So I'm going to share my screen, get rid of my face, but just wanted to give you guys a more personal welcome. It's nice to have a reason to brush my hair this morning. So with that, I will go ahead and share my screen and pull up the slideshow. All right, so I just wanted to do a brief overview of what we're going to be doing. And sorry about that. Okay, there we go. My laptop's not cooperating today. So for some of you, again, some of you are customers and you've worked with us for quite a while, and we've got a good amount of experience with you. So you might already know what we do, but for those of you who are newer to EstesGroup and are not quite sure how we work with customers using Epicor and whatnot, we're an independent Epicor consultancy. We're like a boutique that offers software support. We help with implementations and upgrades. We can help you optimize your business process, offer performance and tuning, rescues and re-implementations to best practices. That's one that we always are happy to help with. Some people don't necessarily get it right the first time, and we are happy to come in and save the day and see if we can button it up nicely for you. That's how Brad Feeks puts it. We do virtual CIO, ERP hosting. We have the EstesCloud 99. That's a lot of 9.999% uptime and US-based data center. ERP managed services, of course, training, full project outsourcing, help desk support, and full IT department outsourcing. For the bottom right-hand corner, Daryl is going to be your go-to for that. He's awesome. He's excited about what he does. So let us know if you need any more information on either of those, and I will not be salesy. Just want to get you in touch with the right person. Thanks. All right, this is our agenda for today. We might tweak it depending on if somebody finishes early. We might give you a couple minutes back for a quick break. So we're going to be starting off with Brad Feeks, making the most of the Planning Workbench. And then after that, we have Daryl Sirota going over our SQL Server tips and tricks for the Epicor admin. And then noon to 1 o'clock, Joe is going to be helping us review some items for SSRS reporting, modifying standard reports, and last but not least, ask a consultant. So this is going to be a roundtable where you can bring your Epicor questions and get them answered. It can be, might be a straightforward answer, or it could be a conversation. So we want to give you a time to share some of your feedback, right? So make the most of this time that we have together today. And for some of you, if you can't attend, feel free to reach out to me directly and let me know. If you can't attend one of the sessions, I will make sure that that gets to you. I want you to have this information if it's going to provide some value for you guys. So we're going to start off with those sessions. We're going to follow the same format as the last summit. We're going to have the core presentation where our resources will be speaking, then a quick Q&A at the end of that session, and then we'll have a 5-minute break. Grab yourself some coffee or a snack or both. Yum. All right, that sounded so cheesy, but that's just who I am, I suppose. All right, and then the webinar tools. Polls are going to be down at the bottom. You can be asking, or going to be shared, and then we will be asking you a question. You can give us your feedback. Just kind of a fun way to get to know each other to make it a little more interactive for you guys. Q&A, just let us know whatever questions you have, and if it's something you think of later, like I said, reach out to me. We want to help you guys make the most of Epicor. And then the chat, obviously, you guys know how that works. It's the apocalypse. We've all been making the most of that. Just shoot us a chat, and we can talk to you that way as well. All right, so obviously you've got me here. I will be a customer account manager for some of you guys, or I already am. And Daryl Sirota, he's our technical services director, and he is, again, like I said, excited about what he does. So let him know if you ever have any questions, and he can definitely give you some feedback that'll be valuable. Brad Feeks, Senior Vice President of Professional Services, and the favorite guy for me to go to when I have a question literally about anything Epicor. And then we've got Joe Trent. He's our principal consultant, and enjoyed working with him the last year. So I'm really excited, again, to have all of these guys be able to present to you today. All right, well, making the most of this, first we're going to have Brad Feeks. And let's see, Brad, what can I do for a quick introduction? Other than you're the SVP of Professional Services, he's been with the EstesGroups for the past 6 years. He works as an operational and tools consultant, and he will be presenting on tips and optimizing the use of the Planning Workbench. Brad, I will hush my mouth and let you take it away.
All right, well, thank you very much. And welcome to this quarter session. Glad that we were able to do this again. Last summer, this past summer, it seems like a long time ago. Time doesn't mean a whole lot anymore for some reason, but we had the first opportunity to do a user session, and that was a lot of fun. And the thought was, with some of the feedback, there was some desire that we do this again. So it's good that we were able to find some time and get some of your time as well, which we greatly appreciate. Let me get myself presenting here. Let me do this actually first. I'm going to show a poll. I would like to launch a poll here with regard to planning and scheduling. All right, so this has been launched. So my question to the group, and what are some of the biggest challenges that you are experiencing in the areas of planning and scheduling? Having come from an Epicor customer and come from the operations area of my company, these things were big challenges when I was in various planning and scheduling capacities. And having been consulting now for some time, I see a lot of the same kinds of challenges coming through with customers, especially with customers in I would say, no, especially every customer, I would say, has some challenge in the scheduling area. Some of these are tools related. Some of these tend to be related to business process, culture, the industry we're in. You know, I have different customers who say, how can I schedule when the customer can change anything at a whim? Okay, well, that's a common one I hear. I hear other customers say, well, how do I schedule when my load is so varying based on what's coming in? If I'm working in a kind of mixed mode manufacturing where I have project work with repeatable products and a blend of make to order and engineer to order products. And within that, there's all this activity between groups and such that require a fair bit of communication, and those tend to be some challenges here. So as I watch, it looks like there's an interesting balance, I would say, across some of these. Looks like communication and load leveling issues tend to be some items that stand out. Looks like planning and priorities as well. You know, they're kind of bouncing around. Looks like everybody has seen some of these and received challenges in each of these different areas. Oh, very good. So I will end the polling now. Share those results. And the winner here is communication. That always seems to be a big one. Being able to communicate upstream to sales and downstream to the shop floor. The planner schedulers of our world are in kind of a thankless position sometimes. Always kind of pulled in many directions to try to satisfy multiple areas and trying to work as intermediaries for these different areas. So in that light, I thought that it would be worth doing a session on kind of one of Epicor's forgotten little tools. I say forgotten because when I go to a lot of customers and we talk about the different planning and scheduling tools, and we pull up the Planning Workbench, this one quite often gets the, how would we say it? what's that? That's a neat little tool. I wish I knew about that. Or else they showed us that at Go Live, but we haven't really used it since. And so looking at and trying to leverage some of the capabilities of the Planning Workbench, I found to be, for a lot of folks, helpful in handling a couple of these areas here. It doesn't really hit to necessarily to the finite capacity. It can affect different priority issues. It certainly captures some of the issues that come up within the manufacturing environment, and it also serves as a communication tool. I will jump now into, I need to share my screen. All right. Oops. Okay, so the idea here was to try and make the most of the Planning Workbench. It's one of the base tools that come out of the system, and it serves a real important purpose inside of the Epicor application. And quite often, it's a place where festering issues go to hide. And if you're not using it, some of those issues may not bring themselves to the fore, and you might end up discovering what we call sometimes the hidden factory. Now in Lean, the hidden factory is representative quite often of a lot of the extra activities that are being done, most often non-value added, that occur within a manufacturing operation. And within that, there's a certain amount of the hidden factory that I see quite often has to do with manual workarounds to things that could be system-based but aren't due to whatever factors. And what I see quite often is there are places where manufacturing runs into issues and they learn how to bypass them without communicating to anyone. And they just go and they do what they know they need to do to make the right product or deliver the right goods. And these issues go unaddressed. And over time, these get larger and larger, such that when you get to the point where you actually try to re-implement a system, it quite often exposes the hidden factory. And I found many customers kind of get to that point where they're, oh, wow, I did not realize I had so many different issues going on because these had all just sort of slipped through the cracks. And the Planning Workbench then is a great tool for capturing those items. It's kind of the crack that captures everything. And then if you have that ability to take those items that have fallen into the cracks and flush them out, it gives you some tools to try to resolve and address them accordingly. Now, the problem sometimes with the Planning Workbench is its usability, and I find there's some things that you can do, just simple things in terms of understanding the different fields and their usage and the logic of the tool that can help you make the most of it. So that's the intent of this session, is to try and work through that. And so really, it all starts with the idea of supply and demand. Right? On the one side, you have various forms of demand that are driving the needs to get goods into the factory, whether it is you're making them, purchasing them, performing some combination of manufacturing and subcontracting to address the demand coming through your area, be it a sales order, be it customer forecast, be it the kind of inventory requirements that you have in order to meet customer needs. I had a customer just the other day, they vary their items. They have build to order products, and then they have what they call French fries. And I said, well, why do you call them French fries? And there's stuff, well, there's a stuff that when a customer comes to us, they just expect them to be on the shelf and ready to hand off. So they have what they call French fry parts. I thought that was a nice analogy. You have job material requirements, of course, that are generating dependent demand that need to be acted on. And so you have on the other side, we have the planners and the buyers, and in some companies, buyer planners. If you're cross-trained, I pity those poor folks, but I've met a couple of them who are managing the purchasing and the planning activities to get work in front of the factory so that they can meet the different types of supply or demand that are coming through. So that said, the Planning Workbench is a great tool for trying to keep the supply and demand in balance, because we understand that a well-tuned ERP system runs, you have supply on one side and demand on the other, but there are always things pulling at that teeter-totter and pulling things in one way or another. And if those things aren't well understood and well discovered and well communicated, those can create some challenges, ultimately leading into things like underproduction or overproduction, missed shipments, underutilization of resources. And it all starts in the Planning Workbench with what are called part suggestions. There's a table behind the system called the part sug table. It's one of my favorite little things to query day in and day out. That's where all of these issues are getting collected. And inside of an ERP system, there's a general idea. You have the kind of generic industry term exception messages. And these are messages that the ERP system is sending to tell you that you should take some sort of action based on the parameters that have been defined on the system and the system's logic itself. And in the Planning Workbench, these take those part suggestions and they collect them. And so these suggestions could be one of many things. Some of them might be basic demand-based jobs, make direct situations, where you need to create a job that's come from a sales order in a make direct situation. One might be the need to create jobs to supply products where something went wrong. Let's say MRP does its normal processing, and MRP in Epicor, when it processes demand, it will create supply records that are unfirm MRP jobs. And these unfirm jobs sit out there and they can be captured by a planner scheduler and converted and firmed up into jobs that we're actually going to execute. And if they're not, the next time MRP runs, it'll regenerate those. But when it runs into issues, it may discover, oh boy, something didn't happen correctly, and I'm not able to create an unfirm job as planned. So I need to stick that in a place where someone can act on it and chase down what the issue is. And we're going to kind of walk through a couple of those different situations and give you an idea of what some of those might look like. It also, when things change, orders get canceled, orders get pushed out, quantities change, it gives suggestions for the planner to now come and take those suggestions and manipulate them accordingly. And so one question that I've had people ask is, has to do with, well, does everything fall on the Planning Workbench? And that really depends on the modules you've licensed and the processes you're going through. If you're in a world that's pure job shop and everything is direct, it's either a make direct material or it's made to order against the sales order. Well, then you'll see a lot of stuff falling into the Planning Workbench, especially if you haven't licensed MRP, because then the Planning Workbench is your jumping off point for creating supply records. If you have a system where MRP is running and most of your parts are flagged for MRP processing, well, then much of this will bypass the Planning Workbench, and you'll hopefully only getting the helpful exception messages that you need to try to correct the issues as they come up. So one question right out of the gate, well, what exactly generates a part suggestion? And this is a twofold answer to the one part question. And that is, there are kind of two different ways that part suggestions get created in the system. One is just the MRP process itself running, reviewing all the parts in the system, then going back and throwing any exceptions, any errors, or any messages that need to be made there for changes and throwing those into the Planning Workbench. Now, there's another way that things fall dynamically into the Planning Workbench, and I call those trigger-based changes. And those have to do more so with any kind of direct situation where you have, for example, make direct sales orders or changes to make direct job materials. I'm going to go ahead here and I'm going to do a little bit of bouncing back and forth between my PowerPoint and some just basic demonstrations. So I'm going to go and let's go ahead and look at an MRP sales order. And we're going to look at the situation where a sales order was processed by MRP. All right, and so I created a number of different parts in the system for this sales order. And in our case, no. Oh, MRP must have run and killed that one on me. I apologize. Situation that I was going to look to was one where a part had a inactive revision and MRP generated a suggestion for that. Oh, that would be. Let's do this. There's a reason that that job's not there. Let me pull up the Planning Workbench. And let me go ahead and do a search. When I am searching for things through the Planning Workbench, I like to use the sort by. Allows me to go by part number, which quite often can be helpful. All right, so here is a new suggestion. And this suggestion is based on, oh, sorry, question came here, what version is Brad using? And I will tell you now from my help, I'll go to About, or how we used to say it in Canada, About, and I am on 600. So that is a nice new version, lots of good fun tools popping up in there, playing in 600 for the first time in a while, running into some screens that have been rebuilt with the kinetic interface and having a little bit of a holy cow moment, just trying to get my bearings as to what has changed. But oh, thank you for the question. So here's an example of the sales order that I had. This suggestion was created by MRP, and it ran into a case where a specific part did not have a suggestion. So I have, or did not have a approved revision. So we have created, as a result, a part suggestion that we need to go and create a job for this item. Now, we'll walk through this a little later and talk through what the steps might entail to resolving these issues for why these things are falling into the Planning Workbench. Now, we will go ahead and what I'll actually do here, I'm going to create a new order entirely. And give it to my favorite customer, Addison. Been adding customers to adding orders to Addison now for probably 10 or more years. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and create an order, and I'm going to create a sales order line for a given part. And we'll make this for 10 pieces. If we come to, go ahead and save this, you can see the dates defaulted down from the header. Dates are always a big thing in the Epicor system. And you'll see here that this part was a non-stock part, so it flagged make direct. So this is a really important point inside of the system, because a make direct demand link will tell the system that, oh, okay, we need to make a part or a job specifically to satisfy this sales order. And as a result, this will create a part suggestion in the Planning Workbench. I'm going to go ahead and add another one here, because this one is actually a little bit more fun. Didn't like that. There we are. Fat fingers foiled again. All right, so this is another part that is going to be a make direct item. What makes this part a little fun here, I'll take just a side step here very briefly. And I will open part entry, and we'll jump into the method here really quickly. And we'll jump into the method tracker for this item. There we are. All right, so we have some materials for this item. And this part here, I've looked up this part, and this part in the part maintenance screen happens to itself be a non-stock item. So as we see this part here is a non-stock item, and as such, when that exists in the bill of material of this parent part, it will generate a suggestion to actually make the part. So we will jump into sales order entry, and we'll go ahead. We've saved this item. We have it flagged as make direct. We'll go now into the planning workbench and find that part. Okay, so we got a couple of suggestions here. I'll quickly grab these. Okay, so for this order, 86-2-1, this was the sales order that I had just created. All right, I have a suggestion now to create or link to an existing job. So this was created dynamically as opposed to MRP creating it when I entered that order. If I was a planner, I could go ahead and, well, you could do a couple of things. If this part is set to have MRP process it, you could wait for MRP to create an unfirmed job for you. If you have reason that you need to get this into manufacturing pronto, you could jump straight into the order job wizard, for instance, another one of Epicor's kind of hidden tools, and we can go ahead and schedule and create this job. And we will know we are done when we see a little new job item come down below. All right, so we've created job 2431. We're going to go ahead and go into that job just to have a look at it here very quickly, because this is an interesting point here. Okay, so we have a job, and now this job has been scheduled. Oh, I'm sorry. Epicor, when you launch the order job wizard from the planning workbench, it likes to freeze you up. One of those, what do we call those? Undocumented features of the software. All right, so now we come and we look at the job mom for this item. We'll see that this one material happens to be flagged make direct. Now what we will discover now is that if we go back into the planning workbench, just as that sales order, that make direct release on the sales order created this suggestion, we'll see now that a suggestion exists for that same job material. So now we see we have items that are for a job, and we'll see that the part and the related job is 2431 was the job I had just created. So they have the same suggestion here. You need to now go ahead and create a job for that item. Now here, I could say that in some cases, I could go into the order job wizard and create that part. In other cases, I could launch Job Manager for this part. This is a fun little tool, and I'd say this one wins the sweepstakes for the most confusing tool inside of Epicor. I've had more than a few customers come to me and just in befuddlement try to understand, well, now can you explain the Job Manager to me? And I say, well, boy, well, that's a 3-beer question, and I'm no drinks in yet, so we're going to have to lay out the tablecloth and talk through this one. But suffice it to say, one of the things that's great about the Job Manager is you could go ahead and create the job from directly from here and get details and go through those processes. You can also go ahead and link it to an existing supply record, so that you are just double dipping on an existing job that's out in the system. Or you can do what's kind of fun here and choose to pull this from stock. So to pull from stock, you're telling the system, oh, I don't want to actually make a job from this. I might have on-hand inventory, and in this case, this is a perfect example. I see a lot of folks in mixed mode world who normally will make stuff to order But occasionally, for whatever reason, overruns or canceled orders, they'll find that they have some of these parts in stock. And in that case, they'd always want to consume that stock before they would jump and make some new stuff. So we'll go ahead and we'll flag that to pull from stock. It asks you that if you are sure, so we'll go ahead and do that. Okay, so now we go ahead and if we come out of here and go back to that original job that we had opened. All right, you will remember that that material was flagged make direct. We'll go ahead and refresh, and now that part is no longer make direct. Now we're going to take that part and issue it just as a regular stocked material from inventory. So the basic gist of all of this was that when you are working in the system, you have the ability to see direct work suggestions immediately jump into the planning workbench. If you're working with non-make direct items, you would have to wait for MRP to generate those for you. Let me return to. All right, so understanding the planning workbench, a lot of it has to do with the key fields. And there are a lot of fields in the default grid layout that are not displayed by default. And I find that if you put those out there, you can save yourself a lot of trouble when you're sorting and organizing things to help with that. And we'll start with one of these, which is the source field. In the grid itself, it's the 4. And this indicates what's called the demand type. So it tells you right away if this is a make to order, a make to job, or a make to stock suggestion. So any given suggestion is related to only one type of demand. And interestingly enough, if it's for an order, it'll have all of the related order line and release information available. If it's for a job, it'll have the job, the assembly, and the material sequence for it. And if it's for stock, it'll include the warehouse. Another field here that is really important to understand is the target job versus the source job. Now, inside of the planning workbench, there are 2 different job fields, and these can get kind of confusing at times. So try to make a point of delineating between those when you're working through these. So the target job number is essentially, that's the job that Epicor is telling you to do something to. Okay, so Epicor looks at this job and says, you need to expedite it, or you need to postpone it, you need to increase or decrease the quantities, or you need to do something else to this job. Now, if this job is empty, that implies that we have the need to actually create a job. Now, the source job is the job that only is applicable to make to job situations. Now, we had just gone through a situation there where we had a make direct job material. And if you have a situation where a source job is driving demand, that'll be populated along with its related fields. And probably most importantly, and I'll spend a fair bit of the rest of the session here talking about type and subtype. So each suggestions will have a 2-tier type structure. It'll have a type, and then underneath that, it'll have some additional subtype. And now at Epicor, what's kind of unfortunate is Epicor's own search tool on the planning workbench is a little more vanilla than that. It's a little more generic. It says, well, you're either searching for new suggestions or change suggestions. The truth is that change suggestions, there's a lot to a change suggestion. Now, the change suggestion will actually encompass a number of different types. These could be date changes, they could be quantity changes, they could be just general changes. And we'll run into a couple of scenarios of that, or they could be outright cancellations. So let me get out of here and walk through the planning workbench here and just talk to some of that. And I'll start by just selecting everything. So as I had said, when you say status, well, they'll show you changes in new, which is not entirely indicative of the kind of data you're dealing with. So I'll go ahead and search. I'm going to pull in, looks like we have around 50 suggestions out there right now since our last MRP run. Oh, did it not take everything? This is better. All right, something I like to do when I'm in pretty much any grid view is I like to turn on the grid filters, because this helps me as a processor, as a data processor, to kind of sift through and sort out the wheat from the chaff. In a lot of environments, there are certain suggestions that would be more important than others. I would say probably the least important might be like a postpone suggestion, whereas the most important might be a discrepancy that is existing. So if we see here, we talked about the for field in one of our previous slides. Everything is either for a job, an order, and it looks in our case that we only have job and order, or it could be for stock. This also has a nice calculated field where it gives you some of the consolidated information in one field, so that this order suggestion is for sales order 5309-2-1, which is kind of a helpful way of understanding right away what you're dealing with. And as we were talking, the types, all right, so there could be new, they could be a cancel suggestion, it could be a change suggestion, or it could be a date suggestion. There are a number of different kinds of suggestions. We'll just kind of sift through these here real quickly. We got new is your most common, I would say, in most cases, and your information here will always be the same. Create job or link to existing job, and that could be through the job manager, as we had discussed. Now, unfortunately, this doesn't always indicate why you need to create this manually versus doing it, letting MRP do it for you. And that's where some of the issue handling can be helpful there. I'll talk about date suggestions. You can see within date suggestions, we have types, we have P, and we have X. So P is for postpone suggestions, and X is for expedite suggestions. So in some cases, Epicor will look at the plan, and it'll look and say, oh, well, you need to expedite this job in order to hit a new date, or you need to postpone a job because, say, a sales order pushed out. You don't need to make that anymore. So you might have reason to push that job out and not have to work on it like you had been. And then there are change suggestions. These are interesting when they come up and you have a situation where the job and the order might conflict. In our case, we might have some sort of conflict here that we would need to jump into. And then cancel. These sometimes exist when something outright needs to be canceled because there are no existing requirements left. We'll have a look at some of those. Okay, so let's talk through new suggestions, and let's see just what would drive a new suggestion here. So in our case, we have order 5380. All right, so this part is for this item. If we come now and we look for the part itself, we'll discover that this suggestion was for a part that did not have any approved revisions. So I would say in working with customers, the most common reason that something will fall into the planning workbench will be based on a revision being unapproved or absent altogether. So basically, if the revision is unapproved, Epicor is saying, well, I don't know how you want to make it, so I can't go ahead and create a job for you. The simplest resolution here would be to approve that part and get that item moving forward. We go ahead and I think rather than maximizing and minimizing here, I'll just keep it as here. So talk through our new suggestion. Another type of suggestion then is a cancellation suggestion. So let's go through and look at 5378, see what happened with this case. Okay, so in this scenario, we had an order, it got canceled, but we had already gone out and created a job for it. So we have a job for this part. And then if we come back to now the planning workbench, we can see for this part. I'll go ahead and, sure enough, I already have the part out there. So release has been canceled, remove outstanding production. So a couple of different ways we could go ahead and do that. The job manager's as good a tool here as any. All right, so we found that we have this job for this item. Now it has, can go ahead and I think if we try to delete this job, it might stop us because it has a demand link still, right? So we might have to just launch this in job entry and remove the demand link. One of the pesky things about demand links is when you have a make to order or a make to job demand link, it won't let you just whack the thing. It makes you delete that demand link first. And knock that off. And knock that off as well. All right, so we'll jump out of this one and we'll close out of here. Now that job went away from the job manager. Now the one challenge here, and I will say this with I've seen this with many customers, they'll say, well, I processed this, but the thing stays. And I've seen mixed behavior inside of the Planning Workbench in terms of removing that suggestion immediately from your grid. It might be removed at the database level, but it may not actually be, it may still be residing in your grids. Sometimes you find yourself having to manually remove those after you've processed them. We get down to another example here of, we got through cancel suggestions. So change suggestions. This is one where you have a situation that you have to change something outright. So we'll go and we will launch order 5377. All right, so in this case, we have a order and we go down, it's for part 06, and we come down to its job and we open that job up right away. I'll just show you what that scenario might look like here. All right, so this is for a part 05. So what you've seen here is Epicor gives us the ability to change the part numbers after you've entered the order. So you've entered the order, you've already created a job for it. Someone can go back in the order and change the part number. Let's say a customer calls you and says, hey, well, you know, I ordered part 05, but really now I want part 06. So the order entry person comes in and enters this as part 06. Now, if your planner isn't watching the Planning Workbench to see that, oh, wow, I still am planned to make an 05 and the part now has changed to an 06, they may go ahead and make the wrong part. This is especially true if you're in a situation where the emails aren't flowing cleanly or you have too many emails and people are missing them. This is a tool there to catch those kinds of changes. It's very similar in a lot of ways to a cancellation. It's a way of saying, you know, this is a tool for getting down to the shop floor and telling your shop floor, hey, something changed significantly. We'll have to go now and make that change. I'll go ahead and go back to the Planning Workbench. All right, and you'll see here when a change suggestion shows itself, it'll be a part rev conflict. All right, so it'll give you the part here that it should be now. And this allows you, there's a couple of ways you could go ahead and change this. One would be to jump straight in the target job. One would be to go into job manager. Let's go into job manager here. All right. And go into job entry. And so now we can change this part from an 05 to an 06. So now that discrepancy will no longer exist in the system. we come now to the next type, date suggestions. So date suggestions come in one of two types, X for expediting a job, or P for the postponement of a job. I'm going to go ahead and go into our sample order here and talk through that a little bit. All right, so let's say we're in a sales order. Oh, didn't like that order. That's probably because I typed it wrong. I'm always thankful that I'm a consultant and not a typist. If I was a typist, I would have been fired on the first day. So let's say with a line here, we have a sales order line that's due for a given day. And let's say that the dates on that pushed out radically. We said, oh, customer calls and says, oh boy, I can't do this. This needs to happen now. First of the new year. All right, so we go ahead and they go ahead and they update that so that it applies to the lower lines. And the planner then, who running the planning workbench, comes in the morning. Comes in the morning. Let's take all again. And they come, they go looking for suggestions. For sake of brevity, I'm going to look for one specific to this part number itself. All right, we'll see we have all right, so for this part here, now it's going to say, oh, we have a change suggestion. Oh. This is interesting. I think I had pushed out, so I should have seen a postpone suggestion, but it's actually seeing a expedite. That's a little interesting. I wasn't actually expecting that. I'm going to give myself another chance here to push this out. See if we can't get the system to reconcile what we were doing here. All right, so now we have on the release, even now we have, this is set. Oh, it did not push down. That's interesting. That might be my source of my problem. Oh, we change our ship by, need by dates out. Okay, so now we come back to our planning workbench. Search for that part in question. All right, now we have, there we go, we have a postpone suggestion. So it's saying the earliest due date should be 1/1 now instead of our previous date that was in October. Now similarly, go ahead and clean that record up. An expedite suggestion could be the very opposite, that a customer could come and say, well, you know, I said I needed it in 2 weeks. Truth is, I need it right away. So in that case, we might find ourselves with a so now we find a recommendation to expedite. Now, one thing interesting to note is that it's within the planning fence and there is schedule in time. So that's an important couple of notes here that we'll want to make while I have just a few minutes here. I always think my presentations aren't going to last long enough, and then I find myself going a little too long. So we'll talk about that in just a second here. And then the quantity. So a quantity change may be a very similar sort of situation where you've made a change to a sales order and now that cascades downstream. So if we go ahead and open this line, and we had it for 20, the customer now says, oh, I need it for 30. But as you realize, on the release, we have a job already. Oh, we didn't for this one. So then that won't give us a problem then. I need one here that actually had a job. Let me go ahead then and do this. Go ahead, actions. We'll create this through the order job wizard. We'll go the other way. All right, so we have a job out there now to make 30 of these. Now the customer calls and says, oh, I'm sorry, I really just needed 10. And so the order entry person makes the change, all is well. But then where do we know in the system that we need to make that change? Well, this falls into the purview of the Planning Workbench. And now we get a reduce quantity request, okay? So it's of a type of reduce, and what it says, this part degrees production down to 10. So this is now telling the system, hey, we have something here that changed. It has all your linking information if you need to actually go out and find that. And now you can go and make that change accordingly so you don't overproduce. So I had talked here briefly about the planning time fence and some of the other key areas out there that can be helpful. I'll open up a couple of forms here. So if what I see with a lot of folks, they will get these suggestions, and what they'll discover is they get many more than they want. And the question comes up, well, do we really want to see all these suggestions? You get all these exception messages, and people stop after a while actually listening to the messages as they're coming through. So one key way is to try and build processes in your system that minimize some of those exception messages if they're not the kind of messages that you're really going to address. So let's say like a postpone suggestion. If you have something that's already been released to production and they're working on it, most factories that I've worked with, they don't want to change a job that's already entered manufacturing, unless it's something like they have to decrease quantity. For anything else, they're going to say, okay, we're going to make these parts, we're going to finish this production run. We don't want the disruption for the shop floor. What you can do in those cases, there are two things that you can lock on a job. One is the quantity, and the other is the schedule. And what I've seen a number of customers do, will create a little BPM for them where when they release that job, so when that job status turns to release, it locks either the scheduling or the quantity flag, or maybe it checks both of them. So that now this item is a firm and locked job, and now MRP will suggest something else. So if it says, okay, you need to make extra, well, it'll create a new job for you to have to do that. Excuse me. So that's one way that you can handle the minimizing of too many suggestions is just through kind of business process policy of when do I actually want to lock a given job. One other way, before I wrap myself up here, is on the part Sites tab itself. There are a number of attributes that you can define on a given part beyond the planning time fence and the reschedule out and in delta. These help limit the number of change suggestions you'll get. So the reschedule out and in are specifically for postpone and expedites suggestions. So the idea is if the suggestion is within 5 days, if the change is within 5 days, ignore. All right, I don't want to deal with this because it's a small change, it's not worth it. If you are working with planning time fence, this works more in terms of the quantities. If you want to have the planning time fence consider the quantity changes for that given part. So I would say these are the areas where I've seen customers dial in some of their part settings so that they don't experience so much noise. This is quite the same with purchase change suggestions, to try and eliminate some of that extra noise that gets in the way of of these processes, from helping the customers do their thing. So that being said, I think I'm pretty much at the end of my presentation, the end of my time. So I want to thank everyone for your time. And if you have any questions right away, we can field these quickly before we head to a break. All right, well, I think we are good then. So Cindy, I will hand it over to you and let you pick it up from here.
The glorified mute button. Sorry about that, you guys. All right, so we're just gonna have a quick 5-minute break if there are no questions. And then when we come back for the next session, I'll introduce Daryl and we'll do another quick poll, okay? All right, I'm going to launch a quick poll. Right, and while you guys are finishing that poll, I'm going to, in just about 30 seconds, I'm going to give you time to fill that out. About half of you have voted already. But our next presentation is going to be from Daryl Sirota, and he is the Technical Service Director here at EstesGroup, and he runs our Managed IT and Epicor Hosting divisions, and he's going to be giving a presentation on SQL Server tips and tricks for the Epicor admin. And I believe, Daryl, if you're okay with it, when we end this polling, I'm going to let you sort of take it from there and speak to the results if you'd like.
That would be wonderful.
All right, give that a few more minutes. All right, and I'm going to share those results with you guys, and feel free to take it away, Daryl.
Awesome. Awesome. All right, well, thank you, folks. I appreciate that. Good day. I'm Daryl Sirota, Technical Services Director here at the EstesGroup, and I've been a geek for a long time, but I also speak English. So I thought I would bring some of the challenges that I've seen in the Epicor / SQL world to the table here and talk a little bit about some of the challenges, some of the solutions, some of the just kind of tips and tricks that I've learned as part of my tenure here at the EstesGroup. Been with the EstesGroup almost 6 years now, but I've been a SQL DBA for, well, since before my kids were born, and they made me grandfather now, so it's been a while. So I wanted to share with you some of that. So we're looking at the poll here, just wanted to come back here. Let's see. So it looks like the majority of folks here are either managing SQL as part of their job description, and then followed up with internal and outside folks are doing it. Fortunately, I've seen a number of people that I've run across, clients that look at SQL Server, and as long as they just overpower the server with more hardware than is possibly ever used, they're good to go. And they probably just, kill it with hardware. And although that might be the solution for some smaller clients, I've seen the best hardware brought to its knees by poor SQL management. And so I wanted to bring into the equation, what does that look like? What is the best practices, as it were? So when we look at this, as I go through my presentation, if you have any questions, go ahead and fire them off in the Q&A session. I'm going to be looking at my slides and hopefully not killing you with, killing you with PowerPoint, but rather I'm giving you guys the opportunity to ask the questions that you need, and I'll wrap up with plenty of time where we can chat about it. I'll also be in the after session with the roundtable event, so happy to answer any questions. Perfect. So what is it that we're really talking about here when we look at SQL Server tips and tricks? So the first question would be, well, why do I need DBA? Judging by the majority of you saying you are the DBA, maybe this would be a superfluous question. I also want to talk a little bit about SQL licensing, because a lot of times it gets confusing in the Epicor spaces too. When you bought Epicor, did Epicor give you your SQL licenses, or are you buying them independently? And as we scale this solution up and scale it out, licensing can certainly become a part. I will talk, of course, about security, because that's a big part of a DBA job, especially in this day and age, when we look at what is keeping it secure, making it high performance. Performance and redundancy, high availability are two very separate things, but we'll talk about how do we make this thing survive a failure. I thought I'd come along with a couple of common scripts that I use. In fact, I've written these scripts time and time again, so I wanted to share some scripting tools with you. And then lastly, what's the difference between proactive and reactive administration, and what can you do to make your job a little bit more comfortable? So when we ask, why do I need a DBA anyway? Well, a DBA, or a database administrator, is responsible for any number of things. And I just listed the top 10 or 12 here in terms of Your database administrator, of course, is responsible for keeping the SQL Server up, right? If it's not up, then you don't have a job. Part of that is making sure your backups run, that your backups are valid, and how do you recover from those backups? Monitoring SQL Server jobs, right? A lot of this stuff in Epicor occurs as part of the task agent. And that, while that's not a SQL Server job, I've seen several clients that will write additional SQL scripts to move data, transform data, back up their databases. And if those backups and those jobs aren't running properly, you need to know, when do those jobs fail and what does that impact in your organization? Managing drive space, right? Databases grow. Management always wants more databases. Management wants to be able to keep tabs on, I need to have 5 backups, 5 different ways. And so making sure that you don't run out of disk space, not only your primary SQL storage, but your backup storage. Index fragmentation. Indexes are a necessary evil of SQL Server, and they fragment. And if you're not managing your fragmentation, then you have a slower performing server than you ought to. Looking at, of course, the security aspect, security and patch management. Are you running the latest SQL? Not only do we run the latest SQL because it runs better, but because they fix bugs. We have to patch Windows every so often, just because if this thing is exposed to the internet, arguably now if it's exposed to your end users are your worst enemy. So we want to make sure that your system is patched. Keeping track of data movement, capacity planning, performance monitoring, all these things are, and troubleshooting, of course, right? When it doesn't work well or it's too slow, how do you go about troubleshooting that thing? And of course, management is always coming along saying, well, we need you to do this with the database, or we need to move this data from point A to point B. And so being able to respond to those management requests, change requests, is always a DBA's responsibility. So this could be a full-time job in your organization, depending on how many SQL servers you've got, how frequently you're having to kind of babysit them. And so this is why you need a DBA, or you need to be a DBA. So let's look at the, of all of those things, I just picked some of the top handful. I wanted to talk about SQL licensing. First off, SQL is not free. You might have got it along with your purchase of Epicor, as a number of our clients do, but it's not free. And if you get that licensing wrong, it can be a fairly expensive day when Microsoft comes knocking on the door and asks you to true up your licenses. We've had Microsoft audits here at the EstesGroup. We get audited every couple of years, and making sure that you've got the right editions running for the right users. Now, SQL is an almost honor system. That is, once you purchase the standard edition or enterprise edition, let's say, you can install that all over the place, and you can put as many users and as many processors, cores as you want. But come the day of truing up with Microsoft auditing department, you'll realize that a 4-core minimum, for example, per processor can be expensive if you got it wrong. I've seen a lot of system administrators say, oh, we'll make this go faster by adding more cores, and they never up their SQL licenses to match those cores. And so therefore, it could be a bad day when you realize you're running 16 processors against a SQL engine, and you're only licensed for 4. It's a 5-figure true up cost, if it were. So your license can be per user, where you buy the license to run the SQL Server, and then you have the each user. Now, the user doesn't have to log into SQL. In this case, it would actually be an Epicor user. That would be your person that's accessing the SQL data. So users aren't just SQL clients, but they're Epicor clients as well. So most folks go to per core licensing. And what that means is that for every 2 cores you run on a SQL server, you have to license it. There's a minimum of 4 cores. If you have any questions about this, see me afterwards. Also, your Microsoft licensing expert, often on staff, or your vendor would be happy to provide you with more details. Now, we do also often get the question of production versus test environments. And that really comes down to, if you have a user, whether it's a testing user or a real user connecting to that SQL, then it needs a license. Now, there are several different types types of licenses. Typically, we talk about standard versus enterprise edition. If you're a big enough shop, you might choose to run this Microsoft Developer Network. And the Developer Network is a way that you can run multiple SQL servers for your developers, AKA testers. But in most cases, that environment is going to need a license. And it's going to be typically a standard or perhaps enterprise edition, depending on how closely you need your test environment to match the production environment. One of the ways that we get around the licensing challenges is to put multiple SQL instances on a single operating system. And I've seen this question a lot where, you know, I've got a production environment and a test environment, and we can put all of those databases in a single SQL instance. Or if you wanted to split them out, you can dedicate a separate instance on a single operating system. And Microsoft lets you run those multiple instances for the same cost, the same license, as running a single instance. So here, for example, in our Echo hosting environment, we have clients that are comfortable with running a dedicated instance for their tenants, all on a single operating system. And as long as that single operating system is resilient and scaled properly, that's a great way to be able to have an instance for your production environment, an instance for your developers, an instance for your tests, an instance for SharePoint. That might not have to do with Epicor at all. They can all be run on a kind of enterprise class server. One of the things that I've seen frequently is that if you split SQL, the SQL engine, and the SSRS reporting function onto two separate operating systems, then you're going to need not only another operating system license for Windows, but you're going to need another SQL license. So to run SQL engine on one box is 4 core minimum. And then to run SSRS on another operating system, you're going to need another 4 core SQL license to be able to run SSRS across. So that splitting apart, we'll talk about that under performance, but keep that in mind that if you have more SQL running, that includes the engine and SSRS that we see all the time in Epicor deployments, you're going to need more licenses. So again, happy to answer any questions as we get down the road. So SQL licensing, a big part that people often are not aware of when it comes to scaling this thing up. So SQL security is a big aspect. You've heard me talk in the past couple of years, it's all about security. And I absolutely believe that when it comes to a SQL server, that's where your golden nuggets are, right? If the bad guys can break into your Epicor solution and be able to read data or write data, then all sorts of bad things can happen. So who's an administrator, right? An admin is first off somebody with physical access to your SQL server. If you're not encrypting your data, and I can walk into your server room, I could boot your SQL server with my boot CD or flash drive and get access to your databases. If I'm a local Windows administrator, then chances are I've got a way to break into your SQL server. You might not even know it. And then, of course, if you have somebody who's a SQL sysadmin, that's a member of the sysadmin role, they're an administrator. And database owners, they're administrators to that database. So then it comes down to the question of who's got access to the database. Well, of course, all your known sysadmins have access to the databases, and all of your known Epicor users have some access. Well, Epicor users don't necessarily have access to the database. They use an Epicor service account. But with read access to your SQL database, I can get to the data that might bypass the business rules. Right? If I'm able to look at the SQL database with Management Studio or Excel reporting or SSRS, I can use that to bypass some of the business logic. So you might find that users that have ODBC access to the database can start reading all of your part numbers and reading all of your vendors and finding when you last ordered stuff and things like that, even though they might not be part of the ordering process as far as Epicor. So keep in mind that whoever's got access to the database can bypass that business logic. And with write access to your database, boy, that's a dangerous thing because I can update data. Updating data means that I can edit information. And even though Epicor stores your Epicor logins, that's your traditional Epicor logins that most folks are still using, that password is hashed, which means I can't go into the database and look at what somebody's Epicor password is, but I can reset it. So that means if I needed to reset a user's password with access to the database, it's a simple update command, and I reset user passwords. And that's kind of nice because when we do migrations, and we bring people into the Echo environment, and folks say, well, I don't know what my manager password was. You know, Epicor used manager password when they installed the system umpteen years ago, and I don't use it anymore, but maybe we need access to those accounts. So with the sysadmin access and write access to that database, I'm going to go ahead and update the manager password and quote, break back into the system. Yes, it's your system. Yes, I have permissions to do that. But imagine the bad guys being able to update your passwords without your knowledge, well, without your permission. A big part about SQL security also is your data leaking out of SQL? Usually it's intentional leakage, but just keep aware that your data probably moves outside of Epicor into a variety of different places. For example, we have a number of our Echo clients that use this e-commerce solution called PartTrap or Magento. There's all sorts of ways. And what we end up doing is we replicate data from Epicor databases into some third-party solution, which is fine, it's desirable, but make sure your third-party folks are secure, that they're also treating your data nicely, and they're not leaking your data out to, you know, anybody who asks for it. Certainly exporting your data, downloading it to Excel, giving API access, right? Epicor is a great solution for being able to consume data through the REST API. We do it all the time. And being able to see, you know, how many orders are outstanding, how many jobs, writing third-party dashboards, all that's done through APIs. And you need to make sure that if your data is leaking out through an API, at least you're aware of where that is and who's hosting it and where it ends up at the end of the day, right? So one of the biggest dangers is downloading Epicor data to an Excel spreadsheet. And then those spreadsheets have a nasty habit of ending up on local hard drives. And once they're on local hard drives, then you have generally not a whole lot of control over them. So make sure that those folks that can download to the Excel spreadsheets know how to treat those spreadsheets in a confidential manner. So lots of questions about security. I just thought I'd open Pandora's box, share with you some of the things that I see frequently in the Epicor space. SQL backups is a huge part of being a SQL DBA. Knowing what your recovery point objective and recovery time objectives is critical. Now, I often ask the question of my clients, when's the last time you had to restore? Believe it or not, most of the time they don't need to restore. Now, yes, there are some Epicor admins that want to back up production and restore to test. I've got a script on that later. But that type of a disaster recovery is something that if you're not aware of, it will reach up and bite you in a bad way. Now, it's one thing to do a SQL maintenance plan to do a backup. And if you see the maintenance plan and there's your BAK file and you're happy and you think that that's working, great, that's a good start, don't get me wrong. But unless you restore that backup, you don't have a warm fuzzy that you've got a backup, right? You've got to test those backups. And when you think you got it right, test it again. And then after you think you got it right, then pretend that your entire SQL server melted down with a bad service pack, or it blew up with a bad RAID controller, or the user said format C: when they thought they were on the test server, all sorts of things. So being able to restore a database is one thing. Being able to restore the entire SQL server, master, MSDB, drive carvings, support files, SQL jobs, all those things that make your SQL server do what it's supposed to do, is a really good test. If you've never done a disaster recovery of your SQL server, don't be surprised if it takes you 2 or 3 days to restore. Now, some of you have third-party tools. You say, well, you know, not only do we do a SQL maintenance plan, but we use Veeam, or we use Backup Exec, or we use other utilities that are backing up the SQL server. And I'm going to tell you right now that that's great, but multiple backup strategies, multiple backup plans can reach out and bite you really bad. The reason for that is when you back up with SQL, it records, I did a backup. And then when it goes to do a restore, it knows via the MSDB file what backups you did. and whether they were full backups, differential, transaction log, I don't care. It knows what backups you did. So when you go to restore, it says, well, here's your last full backup, and here's all the transaction logs that transpired since. So when you go to do a restore, you need to restore full, and then you restore your incrementals or your differentials or however you restore. But if you have a third-party utility that's also doing backups, the last full backup might be not from your maintenance plan, but from Veeam. And so when you go to do a restore, all of a sudden you go, well, who's got the latest backup? Was it my maintenance plan that did it, or was it Veeam that did it? I don't know. So you test it and you realize that multiple backup plans, you have to be aware of who's got the latest copy of your data. And restoring that might be a hodgepodge of patching Veeam with the backup plan, with incremental restores, and it can be a mess really quick. And the biggest problem with having to restore under the gun is that when the fires are burning brightly, the boss is breathing down your neck saying, SQL's down, Epicor's down, we need it restored right away. And if you can't say with authority, my recovery point objective is to get the server back up in, I don't know, 2 hours. Maybe you can survive 2 hours of downtime. And my recovery time, that's my recovery time objective, is how quickly can I get it back up? And my recovery point objective, that is how much data can I afford to lose? Okay, maybe if I can afford to lose 2 hours of data, it means I've got to back up every 2 hours, and that backup has to be off disk, because there are 9 easy ways to lose your data. If you've never had, if you want to lose some sleep tonight, go to Brent's website here. Brent O's our amazing guy. I've not met him yet, but I plan to. Maybe when all this is over. That there's 9 different ways and more for you to lose your data. I've seen every one of these ways in my tenure as a SQL DBA. And one of those is, ran out of disk space, so I'm going to delete all of these BAK files so that my databases keep running. If you delete all your BAKs, then those are backups. You might very well be destroying the data that you need to restore from if data is corrupt. So with SQL backups, you got to test it, and don't test on a special backup, right? If you do a special backup just so you can prove that it can restore, that's no good. What about the backup you just did 2 hours ago or last night? Restore that puppy and use that as your fire drill. And that way you're going to make sure that you have a functional system when it melts down next week, because the SAN guys didn't realize that you were storing SQL Server on those disks. And so they destroyed a set of disks, or they reallocated the SAN, or again, 9 different ways, easy ways to lose your data. So make sure that you test this thing and that everybody knows what the expectations are for your recovery point objectives and your recovery time objectives. I spend a whole lot of time in this environment when we are in this area when I look at clients as we come in for a managed services solution. We ask the business owners, what's your recovery point objective, right? How much data can you afford to lose? What's your recovery time objective? That is, how long is it going to take to get it back up and running? And that can be a scary thing if you've never done that fire drill. So jump off my soapbox about backups. Any questions here? Go ahead and post them in the chat window. I'm happy to answer. SQL performance is a big issue of a DBA's job, and I see this a lot. People will tend to just throw more hardware at the solution, thinking that, well, 8 processors with 64 gigs of RAM is going to be more than enough. And for a small solution, they might very well be right? If you have SSD hard drives not spinning Rust, they perform much, much faster. Flash drives are faster than spinning Rust. But on the other hand, a bad query is a bad query, and it will take a long time to execute. And I've seen this happen many, many times. So a couple of just tips and tricks here. You might have already done this in your environment. You want to separate your database and log volumes. And this is true even if you're virtualized. And the reason is that the I/O patterns of the databases are very different than the I/O patterns of a transaction log. And when you put those volumes out there, make sure you format them with 64K clusters. If you just said format F:, it will default to 4K clusters, and you have inefficiencies. SQL loves 64K IO. So make sure your clusters are formatted 64K. You can confirm that with the check disk command. It will tell you what your cluster allocation unit is. Unfortunately, if you did it wrong, you just have to format the hard drive with the right cluster. Oh, well, formatting your hard drive does lose all the data on the drive. So you might need to test your backups before you format your hard drive. Hey, maybe you can get kill two birds with one stone. You'll format with 64K clusters and test your backup plans all in the same day. I recommend you do that knowing that your backups are good, not testing it for the first time. Okay, SQL maintenance plans, great way to start. In fact, most of our SQL servers that have been set up by Epicor have a maintenance plan in place. The maintenance plan can do all sorts of things. They can do backups, they can delete old backups, they can do index maintenance. And index maintenance is one of the places that I see a lot of Epicor solutions fall down. And that's because index maintenance has online versus offline and reorganization versus rebuilding a database. So reorg versus rebuild, they all are index maintenance. But if you have standard edition of SQL, you can't rebuild or recreate an index online. SQL won't allow it. You have to have the enterprise edition to do online rebuilds of your indexes. So maybe it's not too bad. You just kick all of your users out of Epicor. You shut down the Epicor web application. You turn off the task agent. Now your SQL database is effectively single user, and you can rebuild your indexes to your heart's content. Most of the time, users aren't allowed to do that. The middle of the night is when we're doing things like MRPs and other Epicor processes that need the database online. So depending on your edition of SQL, you might have to get away with a less efficient rebuild versus less efficient reorg as opposed to a rebuild of your indexes. There's a great website, Ola Hollengren, another person whom I've never met, but I've heard that she's won SQL Best of Awards for many, many years. They've got a script out there that will do index maintenance for you like nobody's business. And that will absolutely help you in your SQL performance. If you're in any way disk bound, as most SQL environments are, defragging your indexes is an easy, free way to get more performance out of your SQL Server. One of the other things that SQL maintenance plans can do is delete old backups. And I've seen this work about 50% of the time. The SQL maintenance plan has a step that says, get rid of old backups, right? If the backup is more than 2 weeks old, I don't need it on my hard drive anymore. The problem is that a lot of times that step doesn't work. And so backup jobs continue to grow and fill the disk. And full disks are a quick way to bring down your SQL Server. So make sure you're monitoring free disk space so that you don't fill up your disk and stop doing backups, or worse yet, stop a database. So a couple of different ways there. Maintenance plan is a good start, but probably not the end game when it comes to maintaining your SQL databases. Some folks, in order to get performance out of their SQL Server, they will separate the SQL engine from SSRS. And the reason they do that is because, again, the SQL engine, that is your database engine, and reporting services are two fundamentally different things. They have different I/O patterns. Most people, when they start running SQL in an Epicor solution, they'll put the engine and SSRS on the same box. And that's fine, as long as they don't fight for resources. For example, the SQL engine will use all of the RAM that it knows about, actually to the detriment of the operating system, to the detriment of SSRS. And so what you'll find is that you look at the memory allocation in the SQL operating system, SQL OS, sorry, an OS that's running SQL, and it's got 95% memory utilization. And SSRS is struggling to survive because it doesn't have enough RAM to breathe. So it's getting squeezed. And if you're doing other things on your SQL Server, like third-party processes, for example, P21 loves to run SQL Server, SQL side processes. So P21 environments actually need more room to breathe than an E10 environment. So when you split the engine and SSRS, that's great. Don't forget about your licenses. If you're not going to split them because it doesn't make sense in your organization, at least limit the amount of RAM that your SQL engine can use. It's typically, I'll let it use 80% of the RAM of the server, and I'll leave 20% for SSRS and the operating system. Now, RAM is cheap. You can always throw more RAM at it. If you throw more RAM at it, don't forget to make sure that SQL's memory allocation is set up properly to use the additional RAM, but not 100% of the RAM. So there's that ratio. Again, the 80-20 rule applies relatively well. Your mileage may vary. Now, one of the other challenges that I've seen a lot in SQL servers where both the engine and SSRS are on the same box is that we have these report designers, not Joe, he does it right, but we've got people that will write really bad SQL queries for their reports. It'll have sub-reports, and the sub-report will go off and do crazy things. So to run the report actually requires a lot of resources to render all of the report fields. And so what happens is the SSRS engine goes to 100% utilization because it's busy doing stuff, it's CPU utilization. Now, once SSRS goes to 100% CPU, it doesn't, SQL doesn't have enough resources to execute the SQL commands. So it slows SSRS down, which makes SSRS upset, which means it runs even harder. And so what we end up with is a race condition or a runaway condition. Users usually call up the help desk and they go, Epicor's down. And you look at the Epicor server, or SQL server, and you see it's pegged at 100% CPU. And then you look more closely and you see that SSRS is using 100% of the CPU of your SQL server. So you restart the SQL reporting services service and things fall back down to normal and people go, okay, thanks, you fixed Epicor. And meanwhile, you've got a runaway report. And the next time the user tries to run that report, if you're lucky, it'll send, or not lucky, it'll send SQL back to 100% utilization. And what we end up doing is finding out which report sent it up to 100%, why did it do it, and we fix the report. But meanwhile, every time they run the report, your SQL server crashes. So the way we fix that is to split the engine from SSRS. So if SSRS goes to 100% utilization, great, it's not going to take SQL down, so it just stops the report, not all of Epicor. On the other hand, Microsoft used to have a resource management tool. They got rid of it. I'm not quite sure why. Probably so these companies could come along with other third-party tools to help rein in these runaway processes. And so if you are running SSRS and SQL on the same box, not only do you need to properly allocate memory, but you need to properly allocate or lasso in your CPU so that SSRS doesn't go crazy when it hits 100%. And so therefore, I can absolutely recommend an awesome program called Process Lasso. It's by bitsum.com. It's not an expensive program. Go ahead and grade a copy of that. There's an eval. I don't work for them. I'm the EstesGroup, but Bitsum has this great program that will let your bad reports try to go to 100%. And Process Lasso will rein them in and still give room for SQL to breathe so that Epicor doesn't crash. Yes, the report is still a bad report. Yes, you need to still figure out what that report is doing. But on the flip side, you want to make sure that you're not losing your user's confidence because of one bad report. Okay, so lots about SQL performance. We could spend a whole lot of time here, but index maintenance, that is maintaining and re-indexing your indexes, making sure you're not spinning out on CPU or memory, and you might as well get the best performance out of your disks, unless you're running SSDs, in which case they have they tend to offload a lot of that bottleneck to the CPU and the network channels rather than the disk subsystem. So, moving on. Redundancy and high availability. So really the question here is how much downtime can you afford? And we talked about the backups and the disaster recovery already. This is not about disaster recovery as much as it is about trying to make our system resilient against a failure. We already use RAID hard drives, for example. with a RAID hard drive, right? One drive can fail and the system stays running. We can do memory redundancy. All of the new servers for the past, I don't know, 10 or 12, 15 years have had redundant RAM. So if a memory chip goes bad in the server keeps running with another bad, with all the remaining memory, it just has a bad chip, but doesn't crash. Those types of servers that are not resilient, and you fail a hard drive, or you fail a memory, or you fail a processor, the server blue screens, and you're reaching for your backups. So there's a number of different things that we have to make your systems highly available, right? Resilient and redundant. How much downtime can you afford is the question I always come back to, because if you can't afford to be down, that's great. We can build a solution where you have very little downtime, unexpected downtime, I should say. There's always downtime that you've got for patching or testing, upgrades and things like that, but that's a maintenance window. Outside of the maintenance window, if you can't afford to be down, then there's a number of different solutions depending on what your recovery time, your uptime has to be. And so that might be looking things like VMware or Hyper-V failover solutions. And this is basically where you're replicating your VMs to another storage, to another host. And if that VM blows up, you just boot it somewhere else. In our Echo environment, for example, we do replication of our SQL servers. And if our SQL server were to blow up, and I simply reboot SQL as it looked 5 minutes ago, actually 15 seconds ago if I really wanted to, which means that our redundancy is very high in our Echo environment. We've got a lot of companies that depend on us to run SQL Server well, and so that's why we have our high availability solutions there. Now you can use SQL always on availability groups. If you have the standard edition of SQL, you can do that. It's kind of hokey because it's only one database per availability group. And the copies are offline. That is, standard edition, you can replicate all your data to another server. That's all the databases and transaction logs. And if there's a failure in the primary, it will automatically fail over to the secondary, and Epicor will switch over. Now, it will be a hiccup during a failover of an always-on availability group because the database was running on server A failed for whatever reason, and now the database is spun up on server B. Any transactions that were in flight or in process are rolled back. Any committed transactions are rolled forward. So with the always-on availability group, even if you do a failover, users will notice. Epicor does recover, but if a person's in the middle of a screen, they're going to have to back out and reopen it, and they'll find that none of that screen session was saved, right? Transactions are rolled forward or rolled backwards depending on their completeness. Enterprise Edition is nice. Well, you pay a lot of money for Enterprise Edition. So Enterprise Edition allows your replicas to be read-only. And it allows you to wrap up multiple databases in a single availability group. So you can actually set up Epicor to do all of the reporting off of the standby server, the secondary server, so that it doesn't hit the primary server for reporting, which is another potential drag on your database. So with Enterprise Edition, you can say my users are entering data on server A, and SSRS, the shared data source, is running all against server B, and splitting what they call OLTP, online transaction processing, from DS, decision support. It's been an age-old conundrum, is that we split those two behaviors, right? Users enter data in the database A, and we report off of database B. And so that way you have some best of both worlds. But Enterprise Edition, two copies of Enterprise Edition on two different servers, is not small potatoes in terms of your licensing costs. You could also use a standby server. And we see this a lot in our backup environments, and that could be simply we're backing up our server every 15 minutes. And if something happens to our production SQL server, then we simply boot it up in a standby or virtual or disaster recovery mode. And we see this a lot with smaller companies that can't afford the enterprise licensing or virtualization technologies. So we use a tool. One of the tools that we use is a product called Datto. And Datto can take a snapshot of a server every 10 minutes. And if you declare a disaster, that backup server can be up and running in about 10 minutes in the Datto device. So that's really great for some smaller companies that don't have a whole lot of money to spend in the online high availability, but they yet need to be able to have systems up and running within 15 minutes of declaring a disaster. And that's pretty slick when it comes to the price point for a backup solution as well as a disaster recovery solution. Happy to talk more about that during our roundtable discussion, but that's one way you can do standby servers. Datto is not the only game in town. There are several other products. I know a lot of clients that use Veeam. As long as you test it and you make sure it's all working, you don't want to find out that your backups aren't working on the day the fire breaks out. Okay, moving forward. I wanted to talk about some common scripts, some tips and tricks that we have here that I do a lot of. There are some tools that we use in our scripting world to make life easier. In fact, anything that you can do in SQL in the GUI environment can be scripted, which is great because scripts mean you can do it again and again the same time, exactly the same way. In fact, there are some companies that are such purists, they never run anything in the Management Studio interactively against the server. They use SQL Management Studio to create a script. And then they take the script and they run it against the server. Actually, those purists, they'll run it against the dev box first. Then they'll run it against the QA box. Then they'll run it against the production box, right? Because they have three different environments, a development server, a QA server, and a production server. Now, most of the small companies don't have the resources to run three servers, three SQL servers, much less maintain all of that. So a lot of smaller clients just fire and forget, right? They grab SQL Server Management Studio. They say, we're going to take this database and make it read a simple recovery mode. Boom, online. And it's a relatively low risk thing. It has impact, but it's low risk. So some of the tools that we use, I'm a huge PowerShell fan. If you've ever spent any time with me, I write PowerShell scripts because it's faster than typing, faster than mousing around in Management Studio. And PowerShell has a SQL module that will let you extend PowerShell into all things SQL. So with this PowerShell module, I can write a script to copy production to test, for example, because there's a lot of steps, and I'll get to those very shortly. We could write a PowerShell module to recreate a server, to back up and restore, to anything that you want to do. In fact, we have some clients that use PowerShell to modify data. Now, many clients they'll use Transact SQL or T-SQL, and they'll run a script against a database to edit a record number, to reset a Epicor password. I use PowerShell to execute that type of SQL command. So one of the nice things is that with PowerShell module is there's lots of help out there online. There's also help over here. And you can use that to automate. With the SQL Management Studio script to file, I use this a lot to recreate SQL replication. SQL replication, which is common in e-commerce solutions, is a fairly long-winded thing to set up. The problem with replication is that every time you restore a database, you have to recreate the replication environment. So I can't restore a database without destroying the replication. Great, now once I've destroyed it, how do I build it again? You don't want to do that kind of stuff manually. So what I use is SQL Management Studio to script the SQL replication setup to a file. So now when a customer says, hey, I need you to back up production, restore it to test, and by the way, test is replicated to our test partrap environment, it's literally two commands, one to copy production to test, and another to set up the replication. In fact, we string them together, and now it's one command. And I don't have to worry about all of the headaches in getting replication set up again, because in a replicated environment, that is a common task for your DBA to have to do. Okay, so lots of common tools. one of the, a couple of tools that I wanted to show you, or scripts that I wanted to share with you, not in the details, but in the generic, is how do we copy production to test? How do we, when you copy production to test, there's some things that you have to do, and sometimes you have to add a task agent for your test environment. And Epicor has a maximum of 3 task agents that can be run against one Epicor database. Now, most of us in the small potatoes world or mid potatoes world, they have an Epicor server that runs the task agent service. And that task agent service will run up to 20 tasks in parallel. And that's how your reports get run. It's how your MRPs get run. It's how you do all sorts of automated things. The problem is that if one of those tasks in the task agent gets hung or gummed up, then the whole task agent stops and says, we're not going to do anything more until this bad job gets cleared out of the task agent queue. And that means that reporting stops. And until you actually restart the task agent, nobody runs reports. This is a common failure in the E10 world. People will go, reporting's broken again, and the Epicor administrator goes in and they restart the task agent, and now reports are running. Magic. Now, just simply restarting the task agent isn't a fix for the problem. The problem is a corrupt report or a corrupt process was gumming up the task agent, crashing the task agent. But you can absolutely, as part of your high availability, install the task agent service on another operating system and point it to the same database. So now you have 2 task agents. Task agent 1 is running all of the MRPs, and task agent 2 is running all the reports or everything else. And you can actually dedicate which task agent gets what type of a job if you want. Okay, but you can only have 3 task agents. Epicor put that hard limit in there. So when you restore a database into test, it remembers all the task agents that it had before, and you can't add a 4th one because for testing purposes, because 3 is the max. So I'm giving you a script today, free for the price of admission, how you can free up so that your test environment can get a task agent. Boy, say that 3 times fast. Up and running so that you can do your testing, obviously. Another script that is, I don't want to say common, but is available is, let's set a database to simple recovery mode and truncate the transaction logs. Now, that's easy to say, but dangerous to do. If a database is set into simple recovery mode, that means the database can only be restored via a full database restore. There is no transaction log or point-in-time recovery. And for some databases, that might be okay. Others, it might be really painful, right? I don't want my Epicor production database in simple recovery mode, because if it were to corrupt, I'm falling to last night's backup to be able to restore it. That's no good, right? I might lose 23.5 hours of data, according to Murphy. On the other hand, what we can do is some databases are fine in simple recovery mode. Your test database, because you don't need to do point-in-time recovery to test. That's usually superfluous. We usually play with test, and then we wipe it out with another copy of production. So let me show you the script that I would use. This is kind of the pseudocode, if you will, to do the restore. And that is basically, we're going to do a backup of the production database with the copy only and compression flags turned on. A lot of people do SQL backups without compression, putting a lot more bits on the hard drive than they need to. And we're going to use copy only because I don't want this to interfere with my regular nightly backup jobs. Copy only says, do the backup, but don't tell anybody you did the backup. And compression just squeezes the BAK file. Then we've got the backup of the production database. We're going to have to stop the target database and the E10 task agent because you can't restore a database that's in use. So stopping the test web app and the test task agent is going to be necessary to be able to restore the file. And so then the next step would be to restore the database. And after you restore the database of your production, it's going to have the same recovery mode as production. So you might choose to put that target database in simple recovery mode and shrink the transaction logs. Why use all that disk space if you don't need it? Okay. And that puts that test database in a smaller, more lean and mean, a little bit faster too, with no transaction log. Then you'll have to restart the task agent and because of the web app. And by the way, whenever database access is interrupted, the task agent gets really offended. It gets gummed up and it needs to be restarted. So you want to restart the web app and then the task agent. I actually had those reversed. So web app first and then task agent. Now, once you've restored your test application, you then are probably going to go into the E10 application and change things like the company name, right? I don't want the company name being the same as the production company name. Change it to test EstesGroup. And that way people, when they run their reports and they're looking at screens, they know they're working in the playground and not in the production environment. The search URL will be reflective of the production search URL. And if you're testing search, then you'll need to update that URL because it'll have the wrong search index. And if you're using Service Connect, Manifest, Bartender, any one of 100 third-party add-ins, those things will have to be updated also because the restored copy of the database is going to think it's production. So you're probably going to need to change those application settings to say, no, we're test. And last but by no means least, and this is kind of a shoe-in for Joe, if you back up and restore the database, that doesn't copy any custom reports that you've written. So if you have custom reports that are in production and they've been updated and you need to copy them to test, moving the SQL database doesn't move the reports. You'll have to do that yourself or another PowerShell script. Or if Joe's nice, he'll show you the way to do it inside Epicor. And if you change, depending on how you move those reports over to the test environment, don't forget to update your shared data sources. There's nothing worse than running a report in test and having it pull production data and you scratching your head trying to figure out why it doesn't reflect the test data. That's often because of the shared data source. So lots of ways to do that. What I wanted to do here is show you the command that would help us do that. In this case, it is a shared a command here. This is actually kind of PowerShell-esque. The $ is the giveaway in that we have back up the database. In this case, I'm backing up a database called TrainingDB, and we're putting it out to a disk file called something.bak with the compression and copy only. We're going to overwrite that BAK file and just tell me every 10% when the backup gets run. Then I'm going to stop the task agent by using the PowerShell command that says get the service off of whatever my test server is, and Epicor ICE is the name of the Windows service that is the task agent. So we stop that service. And this is kind of version agnostic. I like this because I don't care whether you're running E10.1 or E10.2, et cetera, this will catch that task agent and stop it. We also then stop the Windows activation service, and that stops IIS and all of its dependent services. And then we do the restore command, which says we're going to restore the production database from the disk, and we're going to move the database files. So the database files as they existed on the production server, the paths will be different in your test, or the names will be different in your test. So this is a command that basically says take the logs and move them over here. Take the databases and move them over there. Again, depending on your environment, this command will be different, different paths. Then we start up the task agent and the Windows services, IIS application pools. We start that up. And these two commands here say, these are all the services that you're going to want to start. And we push that into a PowerShell command. And at the very end, I tell the user, don't forget to update your company description and all those other things inside the Epicor application. And you might choose to copy SSRS reports, et cetera, fix replication. But this is kind of a high-level script that I run all the time in our Echo environment, because users say, hey, can you copy production down to test again? And I go, sure. And with a script, it's a single click, and I can go about and do it. And any of you folks that are Echo customers, that's an easy ticket. It takes me 5 minutes to run the ticket. It takes me longer to get into the server to start the script than it actually does to do the copy. Okay, this is the script to do your task agents and fixing the task agent maximum. You want to run this in the test database. not in the production database. If you run this in the production database, all your task agents go away. So make sure this is in the test environment right before you stand up a new task agent. I was going to give you the script to set databases in simple recovery mode and get the transaction log, but I decided against it because it's a really dangerous script. If you accidentally run that in production, you ruin your backup strategy. And I don't want to do that without proper consulting, proper eyeballs. So I want to wrap up here with the difference between proactive and reactive administration. And this is true of any service, and SQL is no different, right? If you're reactively managing your environment, every day is a surprise, right? You don't know what you're walking into when you walk into your office. When are you going to have to buy more disk, CPU, licenses? How many more users can I take on before I have to buy more stuff? What does my recovery point and recovery time objectives looks like? And you know, well, it hasn't broken yet, so no big deal, right? If it hasn't broken in the last year, it's not going to break in the next year. Murphy's watching and working hard against you. If you're proactive, then you'll know what to expect within reason, right? Users will be users, report writers will be report writers, but we reasonably can expect that that's not going to ruin my day. And being able to trend this thing will show me resource utilization over time, that I know when I'm going to run out of disk space. I know how many users I can take on before I need to buy another SQL Server, etc. And it also gives us a defined disaster recovery plan. So if you have a disaster, it's not a, oh my gosh, what do I do? Throw your hands in the air and run around in circles. It's, here's the script. This is our disaster recovery. So in that vein, I would encourage you to look out at our services. I promised I wouldn't give it a sales pitch, but here it is. EstesCloud Managed Services. Some of you are taking advantage of this already, where your DBA experts are a phone call or a ticket away. Okay, you can have us available to help you with your issues proactively. And that can be both an on-premise solution where we manage your on-prem servers. We do this for a number of Epicor clients. We manage the Epicor box and the SQL box, and then it's a no-brainer. We also can take the whole problem off of your hands if you choose to have us host your ERP solution, right? If you're tired of running your servers, if your servers are old, if it's time for an upgrade, then maybe it's time to talk about Echo, which is our EstesCloud hosting platform, where we can host your ERP, and we'll take care of all the DBA work. You don't have to worry about it because it's under the hands of the experts. So with that, I'm going to open up to any questions. I think I've run right up to the edge. I'm not as good at my timing as Brad is. So with that, I'm going to shut up and turn the keys back over to Cindy, and I'll watch the chat line and the QA line here for any questions. Thank you so much. I appreciate your time, and I look forward to talking to you in the roundtable. Thanks.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Daryl. And yep, so we are going to open the floor up for questions. Does anyone have any questions? Oop, every time. Sorry about that, you guys. Fat fingers today. All right, well, with that said, we'll take a quick break. I'm going to give you guys until 2:02 so that we can let you guys step away if you need to, and we'll start back. We'll run the poll in a few minutes, okay? Thanks. All right, everyone. While a few others are coming back, I know we've got a couple minutes. I wanted to go ahead and get the poll out there so that you guys had time to vote. We'll give it a couple more minutes. All right, I'm going to give it about 30 more seconds, and then I'm going to introduce Joe. All right, so the poll was, what are your most common report changes? Looks like the most common was rewriting converting Crystal to SSRS. Second was logo. And then, oh, excuse me, I'm so sorry. Adding new data tables to existing reports, that was the winner. I looked at the wrong spot first, and custom BAQ reports with second. So you guys should all be able to see that. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and introduce Joe. Joe has been with EstesGroup for a number of years. He provides custom solutions, working with Product Configurator and assisting customers with data conversion. And he's going to be giving his presentation on modifying standard SSRS reports. So with that, I will go ahead and give you guys Joe.
Welcome to my quarantine. All right. We're going to talk about some SSRS reporting today. And I noticed one of the things in there was that we talked about in the little poll there was BAQ reports. And we won't go through any of those now, but we've done some of those. Rewriting standard reports into a BAQ report where, for example, the job traveler, I often get or have several times gotten a request to simplify that job traveler because it can run a lot of pages for a complicated job. Customer may say we only want one page per job. So we've done that a number of times in a BAQ. That's beyond the scope of this presentation. And we will try to get to adding a table to a report if we have enough time to get through. So to go ahead and get this in, we will dispense with all of this and get right to it. So I'm going to hide this fellow looking at you now, and then share my screen. Here a bit. So hope all of you can see that. You should be seeing my Epicor home screen. If you're not, let me know and we will fix that part. All right. We're going to start out with the report. We're going to start at an order entry. And we're going to see how to change the order entry or the order acknowledgement report that's printed from here in the order entry. So just to go through here, we will look at the print dialog. And you'll notice here we have a thing called report style. And if we click on this arrow, you'll see it comes with one report style, which is standard. And we won't want to change the standard report. We want to leave that alone. So we're going to add another report style and do some changes to that and another couple of things we'll look at along the way. So a couple of things we're going to do is we're going to add a logo. We get that a lot, that request a lot. And we're going to add some information to the page. In this case, we're going to add the entry person from the order on there. So the first thing we will do is go look for this report style. And we can not do the right click there. We're going to open the report style maintenance, handily open right here, and look for it. I happen to know that the name of this is order act. So we'll start there, but you'll see that you can look through here to get the right report style for your particular report. And we will look in here. Again, there's one style. And that's what it looks like. There's a couple of things to note here. When we click the print button, the print preview, an Epicor report runs in the background. You don't see that. And it sends its data to the report data definition that's set up in another place. The report data definition takes that information and adds some more data to it. Sets it in order and everything, and then it sends it to a form. In this case, that form lives under the reports folder, sales order acknowledgement, SO form. Okay. So if you remember, we're not going to change our standard report. So we're going to duplicate it. So I'm going to say copy report style. And we hit a copy, and in a little bit it comes up. Now we're cooking. Now we have our copy, and I'm going to just give it a new name rather than just copy. And notice that the report location has changed. We'll see this custom reports subfolder, whereas the standard one is just under reports. Now we have a separate folder under reports just for custom reports. And then the subfolder sales order acknowledgement SO form. So I'm going to save that. And we're going to start doing some changes. The next thing I'll do is download the SSRS report, and I'll show you why we need to do that. I'm going to put that on my laptop in a moment. And it's going to go in this demo folder. You'll see this reports folder under here and see custom reports. And it's intuitive to go try to put those reports right there, but Epicor knows all I need is the top level folder just above the reports folder. Epicor knows what to do with it. And here is that folder on my C drive, because it's easier to get to there. There's my custom reports. And there are all the forms that go with sales order report. So the SO form is the main form, and then these are sub-reports that are called from SO form. I'm going to open that up in Report Builder, which I have installed on my PC. And it says, I can't find the server, and I say, I don't care. All right, so the first time I saw one of these forms, I said to myself, that looks a lot like Microsoft Word. This should be easy. That's what I said. And it was partially correct. So you can see that we have the form laid out. We've got different sections. This is the address section, and then the invoice header section, that kind of thing, order header. And you'll notice that for some reason, I got an old copy. I'm going to take that out and show you how to put that in there. Gathering my thoughts here. Okay, one of the things we want to do is we want to add on this form the person who entered the order in the first place. And if we look in the report data definition for order ACK, which I can open with a right click. Eventually. This report data definition is not the fastest thing to do it with. But I'll go in here and you'll see the tables that the Epicor report is filling part of this in, and then the report data definition gathers some more stuff to feed in there. But it all starts with the order header. And this will take a moment to pop up. If I look under this table order header, I will find the fields that go along with it. And it's taking its own time. Okay, now we got it up. The fields, it's hidden under this tab exclusion. These are the fields in the order header that we have available to us to print on the report. And if I scroll down to find entry person, we'll see that entry person is excluded from this report. If we took all the fields available to us in all these tables and sent them all over to the report form, it would bog it down, if not just stop it from running. So we unexclude the columns that we need to use in the report. And in this case, it's not unexcluded yet. And notice that if I click on it, it won't let me change it. So Epicor prevents me from editing this base form. So I'm going to make a copy of it as well. And this will take a little bit. All right, and we're still on the order header. I think, maybe not. There we are. Entry person. So we can unexclude the column. And we're not going to use a label, or if we're going to use the label, we can unexclude that too. All there is to that part. And here comes some of the fun stuff. So back at the form, we will look at data sets. And you'll see it has several data sets here. Order head, and that's where all the good stuff's coming in. Some of the parameters, company information, that's mostly for the header, report images, but all our good stuff is going to be in this order header. And if I right click on order header, I will see a thing called data set properties. And this data source, that's one thing Daryl mentioned earlier. We'll talk a little bit about data sources later if we get a chance. And the thing we're going to look at now is the query. And this is where we receive the data from the report data definition, the RDD, for use in our form. And you'll see this ugly looking SQL query here that tells us all the fields we're going to use on this report. And as you can see, it's not very edit friendly, so I'm going to copy all, and I'm going to send that over to my handy dandy Notepad++. And you'll see the query here. All right. Start a little out of order here. This is the section of the query that determines what files or what tables we're going to take information from. So we see we built a subset of order head that's come from the Epicor report and the RDD. So I've got the subset of order headers, which is probably going to just have one order header in it. And we're going to call it T1 because you can see how much extra typing would be to type all that in a whole bunch of times. So order header is T1, etc. And then these are the fields from T1 that we're going to bringing into the report so that we're able to work with them. All right, and one thing we'll notice if we look up here for entry person is entry person is not in there. So I need to bring it over as part of this query. So anywhere up here is good, but I like to go find the end of the T1s or whatever table I'm working with and put in T1, and remember the name of the field was entry person and a comma. All right, and that's all we need to do there. And I'm going to select all of this and copy it. Select all of that and paste. So that now when I go up here, if I look hard enough, I'll find T1.entry person. The next step is actually the actual field that SSRS is going to work with. So you can see here, for each one of these fields over here in this column, we will find a field here. So we're going to add a field from the query, and the field name is just the same as in the query. Make sure I type it all right. we can use anything we want here as long as we use the field from the query. So entry person. Oh, and I already done that. All right. I went through this last week, and evidently I left a little vestige of something behind. So you can see what I did then. But we'll notice down here, we've got entry person in our form, ready for use. Backtrack just a moment so I can get this form so we can look at the differences. Just print the standard report. Notice since I added the report, now we have another style selection. That will pop up in a little bit. And here we'll see there are different sections of the report depending on the data that's available to us. Up in the header section, we don't really have this data available to us on every sheet. In what they call a tablix. If we look here, we'll see that thing is called a tablix. It's a table that's got different sections. And you'll see this section is for the invoice header. And then we've got another section here for invoice detail. And this is where your order lines will print. This one's only going to go once because it has the PO number, all of that kind of thing. And again, I'm going to get rid of some of my vestiges so we can do this again. Apologize for that. Daryl, I think maybe the task agent's down. I printed that and it didn't print.
Hang on a second. Let me go check my services, make sure it's back up. You're right there.
Right. While we're looking at that, we'll just go look at the system monitor and see what's happening. You may do this from time to time when you're running reports. Okay, so that one is still running. That ran. Yeah, it was just taking a while to run. Here's a standard report. You'll see this is your name and address. This is your invoice header kind of information. And here's the invoice detail. And you saw that over in this, this section. So what I'm going to do is create a label and a field in here in this section so that our entry person will print right under the terms. And I've made this column. You show this row, and I've made this column a little bigger here to take that. And I could drag this field right on there, but one thing that's going to happen is the font and the size are not going to match these things up here. So I'm just going to take a couple of these and I'm going to do that one. And I'm going to copy it and paste it and bring the copy over here. I'm not get too worried about alignment. And I'm going to copy the actual PO field, paste, and bring it down there. And you notice this has the PO information in it, and I'm going to change what's the expression, what's in that actual box. So that's got one of those parameters we looked at, literals. And I'm just going to type in here entry person. And in here, I'm going to say entry person. You'll see over here when I've got this text box active, it's got some of the formatting, no padding, that kind of thing, and a size, and it's got a different font in here than the default font, which if I had just dragged that entry person up in there, it would just look funny. So I'm going to save that. And that's all we have to do here for now. And I'm going to go back into the report style maintenance. And I'm going to upload in a moment. All uploaded. Now let's go back to my order. Print that again. We're going to take we've got one more thing to do. In the report style maintenance, I skipped this step. This report data definition, I now have this copy. I'm going to save that. Otherwise, I would have gotten an error because it wouldn't have seen that field entry person. And now, that will be up in a little while. You wonder, you can always check on the system monitor. Sure didn't see it. These things always happen in a demo. Okay, submitted, done with that. Go to my report on the system monitor. And I generated an error somehow. Well, this would be a good place to look at that. So I select that one. What is it I have done? It always works perfectly in practice, you know. Another thing, one of my vestiges from last week. So I want to do that. I'm going to take that field out, and I'll add it back in later if we have the time. Upload those changes.
So Joe, not to jump into the middle of your presentation, but I'm looking at this SSRS error logs, and it tells me that there's an invalid object name, plant underscore, and then a big long GUID.
Yeah, that was an operator error. That was a vestige of some stuff from last week.
Perfect.
It didn't delete all my changes that I told it to delete.
Well, we should have backed up from production and restored into test. I'll jump on, sorry.
Well, I'm going to try printing that one more time, just for giggles and grins. Of course, I'll work that one. If not, we're not going to hold the crowd up. We're going to go do some other stuff. And you'll just have to imagine that it worked. Yeah, I got another error. And I won't drag everybody else along with my troubleshooting. Except to look at this one thing. Yeah, more leftovers. Sorry about this, folks. I'm going to try and make it work on this one. All right, guaranteed to work. Money back. Guess you get your money back. All right. Well, I'm glad it all worked. I won't belabor this anymore. I'd just like to be able to show you that it worked. We would see that entry person show up right there. And I'll run through how to and show you how to put a logo on there. Well, look here. This is another vestige. I've got an Estes logo. I'm going to delete that one off to show you how to add a logo image. We'll just right click and add an image. And I've got an Estes logo right there. So I've got one in the report. And I'll need to insert it on here. So I insert an image. There we go. And I can have different choices for logos, but On this one, I'm going to say, take the one from inside the report. You notice it makes a really small one there, and I just drag it to the appropriate size and put it where I want. And I would probably rearrange the company address and everything to go along with that. All right. And I'll show you this thing. Whenever we, one of the questions or one of the poll answers were that many people are interested in adding another field to the another table, information from another table into the report. We'll go back to the report data definition. And for our example, we're going to add I believe the plant description and from the plant table. And if you'll notice, we don't have a plant table up here. So we're going to actions, file new table. Pick this one. Then we'll save that, and I'll show you this thing. You notice under exclusions, we've got the table in here, but we don't have any fields. And that's because when you hit the refresh, it will bring those fields in. All right, and then we have all these. So we want to unexclude the ones we need. And we know we always need company. And we know we're looking for plant, so we need the plant. And we need the name. We'll need the company. We're not going to display it anywhere. And we need the plant. We're not going to display that anywhere either, because we need to know those in the next step. We give that a little save. The other thing I wanted to show you was the report relationships. And here's where information is brought in with the order header, order detail, and information. So we don't have a relationship for plant to bring that in. We can leave that plant there and it won't have any records in it because we haven't told Epicor to do that. So I'm going to define a new relationship and call that order head to plant. And I've seen some folks use something like this just to signify that this is a custom relationship. It's easily identifiable. And of course, the parent is going to be order head. And we happen to know there's a plant field in there to key off of. The child table is going to be plant. And for this case, we want output because we're actually going to use the plant field as output. And this is a simple query. From the parent field, we're going to get company. And plant. All right. So what this is going to do is tell Epicor for every plant field that's in the order head, possibility there could be more than one, I suppose. We're going to go look up the record in plant for this key. So we should have all that. All righty. Then, if you recall, we had this query out of here, and that's the thing I didn't notice earlier. I had the plant in there and was getting an error on the plant because I hadn't added this last step I did. So all of that should be set up. So we're going to copy that, bring this back. If we didn't have that, we would have to add this part right here. We're going to add plant, the temporary plant, and we're going to call it T5. And up here on T5, we're going to say T5.name as plant name. And this is important because there's probably another just name in there. So we want to call, we're grabbing the information that's in plant.name and storing it in plant name. Put that away. We'll go back over here to our query. I hope it works this time because I figured out what I did wrong. Put that in the query. And go back to fields. Add the field, plant name. Save that. And I want to show you what happens. I'm going to stick this plant name right over here. So let's just see what happens when we drag one in instead of doing the copy I did earlier. Just drag that over. And then we want to look at the expression. When we drag those in, notice this first appended on the field plant name. What this is going to do is get the plant name for the first record in this this record that we brought over. It doesn't matter so much on this one because on the order head, normally you're just going to have the one header. But if we were somehow to print batch records, we wouldn't want the plant from only the first record, we'd want it from the actual current record. So I'm going to take that first off. And it looks more like this one we just did. Okay, let's save that and give that a spin and see if it works. Okay, we're all uploaded. Let's try that once again. And we'll get the standard one again. Modal windows. Oh, there we go. So now we have a logo, we have the entry person, and we have the plant. All right, success. That was nerve-wracking. All right. I guess As I said, these are some of the changes we see requested a lot. Of course, we also see a lot of requests for more complicated things that require a little bit of head scratching to get done. But we've done lots of different types of modifications over the years. And I suppose that is most of my presentation, and I would sure entertain some questions if you have them.
All right. I have one from Harold. He says, everyone chats about why reports typically take so long to print review. Any developments that you know of that maybe Epicor reprogramming? If not, any tips on how to increase speed?
Me too. I see this some more on folks who are hosted with another company who shall not be named that aren't optimized. They take a long time anyway sometimes. We weren't taking too long to get here. I know some of my past experience where some of the reports were actually taking too long and would time out. We went from the Adobe PDF viewer to a thing called Foxit, which was what we were viewing on this screen. And that part runs a little faster. Some of it has to do with the complexity of the report itself. By the time the Epicor report, there's, like I said, there's 3 layers. There's the Epicor report, generates its information. It sends that to the report data definition, the RDD, and that does some more things and passes it along to the report form itself. It takes a while to do, and then it goes to the PDF viewer. So there's your 4 layers. A lot of it has to do with how the SQL Server is maintained, for one thing. In the SSRS server, you can put all of those things on the same platform, and you might see diminishing results. So I don't have anything from a report design standpoint other than just you try to do good queries. And I wish I had a better answer to that, because I'm stymied many times myself. Hope that helps.
So this is Daryl. I would be happy to jump in, and we can talk about that in our roundtable a little bit. I can unpeel some of the SSRS layers that might help you out, help you answer that.
Oh, there's a good question. Is the easy way to copy custom SSRS reports from production to a test environment? And let me share my screen again. A report at a time. This is about as easy a way as I know on the report style.
You're not yet sharing, Joe.
Oh, I do that quite often. On the report style maintenance, we downloaded this report to my local PC, and when we're done editing, we uploaded it to the back to Epicor. If you want to go from say your production environment to your test environment and back, you can go to your production environment and download the current operating version of it to your test environment. And when you're done, you upload your SSRS report back to your test environment, make sure it works. Then you can go over to your production or your live environment and upload this again. And remember, when Daryl talked earlier about your data sources and making sure those fixed, this will fix those. We didn't talk about maintaining or editing these from the server itself. And you can get your SQL Server set up where you can go more directly edit these SSRS reports. And if you do that and you go from between environments, you really have to watch those data sources. If you open one up off the server and edit it and then try to just save that over onto your on production environment, you'll find, you're getting data from the test server or vice versa, whichever way you go about it. So this way, Epicor says, yeah, I recognize this, and we'll fix that data source.
All right, do we have any other questions? All right, well, if that is so, thank you very much, Joe. We're going to take a short break, and then we'll come back for Roundtable.
Thanks, folks, for bearing with me through that difficulty. Appreciate it.
Great job, Joe. All right, so now welcome back. I know we've got 1 minute left, but I'm going to go ahead and start the last poll. And feel free to just answer that as you can as you come back into the meeting. And thanks for staying with us. I know it's been a long meeting, but this is nice to be able to do every quarter, the last couple of quarters. So. If anyone wants to know what I did during break, I killed a spider. So, you know, I made it back. They terrify me. So I was glad to get that over with. That was going to be a distraction. All right, so we're going to end that polling and share those results for you. So what roadblocks or issues do you encounter most in maintaining and optimizing your Epicor system? Multiple choice. Ooh, high school. All right. Let's see. The winner was closing gaps in software. Runner up was performance. Third place, new modules. And in tie for fourth place, defects, bugs, transaction time. All right. So that wraps it up for that portion. And now we're going to have our roundtable discussion. So any questions that you have that are sort of miscellaneous, feel free to pull those in. And Daryl, I believe that you were going to answer some one of Harold's questions regarding the SSRS.
Absolutely.
Great.
All right. Okay, so we'll open it up with that. And then if you have any other questions, comments, etc., you can put them in the Q&A. Didn't know if we wanted to open up the mics potentially so that we could allow folks to unmute should they choose. So the question is, how do we make reports run faster? And as Joe intimated before, that there's actually running a report out of Epicor 10 is a multi-step process. So the user requests the report and they provide a bunch of parameters. When they hit the submit button, it goes into the task agent queue as an immediate run request. So the task agent is looking at it several times, polling the task agent queue. So the task agent has to pick up the report. It then has to send it down the pike into the Epicor reports database, which then generates that report GUID, and then that gets sent down to the SQL reporting services. SQL reporting services get this thing, it renders the RDL, brings back all the data, puts that PDF file out in a spot on the Epicor server, returns that PDF file to the end user. The end user then has to have a PDF viewer tool, Adobe, Foxit, etc., of which then they render the report, or the PDF is opened and printed through that PDF rendering tool. So when you look at all those steps, it's kind of amazing that the reports run at all, because it's a great number of steps, and there are spots in there that you can certainly bottleneck. I would say initially, if the task agent isn't doing its job properly, it's going to be slow picking up the report. And then similarly on the client side, the PDF rendering tool. Adobe is great, but it tends to be a rather large piece of software and riddled with security, such that while it's great security, it slows the PDF rendering down. So I do, like Joe, prefer Foxit, F-O-X-I-T, which is another free tool. But then the problem at the end of the day is that these darn report writers can write whatever queries they want. And the queries that they render or that they write have to be rendered by SSRS. So in so doing, there's a big variable that SSRS keeps a track of what they call the execution log. So in your report server database, you can actually run a query to say, show me all the reports that were run and how long did it take to get to the data out of the SQL database, in this case, the Epicor content database. How long did it take to compute all of that data, and how long did it take to return it back to Epicor? So one of the key troubleshooting tools that I use to see are reports running slow is to use that report server execution log 3. If you're interested in the latest version of that, it's there, and it's a view inside the report server database, so that you can see, at least from the SSRS side, are there bottlenecks that are being created typically by the report designer, or because SQL is confused about what indexes to use. So if you're running a report and that report is always slow, we can work on troubleshooting that. If on the other hand, if it's once off and that report usually runs okay, but every third, 13th time it runs bad, or it's always bad for Fred. It could be that Fred is entering a parameter such that he is creating a very large query, right? It takes longer to run a 500-page report than it does to run a 5-page report. And if Fred is always asking for 500 pages, looking at the first page and throwing the rest away, it's time to modify the report. On the other hand, if Fred needs 500 pages, then we can work on optimizing that report. And typically what that involves is looking at the queries that are made by the report and looking at through this tool called the the query optimizer, which is a SQL tool that we can use to say, what was the query and how can we get it at that data faster or perhaps more efficiently? A lot of times it's just changing the join syntax. It could be adding an index to the database, but those things are typically repeatable. It's the one-off, it was only slow occasionally when you have to go back to the user and say, well, what did you pick when you ran that report? Actually, that stuff is recorded over in the task agent log and can be queried. You don't have to go to the end user, but usually you find out pretty quickly that Fred's asking for a 500-page report and wondering why it takes so long. So there's a number of different tools that we use to troubleshoot that. The report server execution log 3 is probably going to be a good place to start. I'm sorry, can you come again? Gotcha. I'm sorry, could you repeat your question?
We've got a little bit of an echo, so if you are not speaking, I'm going to mute you, or if you could make sure that you're muted if you are not speaking.
I'd say one other thing, and tagging on to Daryl, what I've seen with some customers when they have had issues with performance of reports, and we look back in just like the system monitor, what we found is there's kind of two areas where performance can build up, or time can build up. One is the generation of the report itself, and the other is after that report generates and it's time for that report actually to present to the client. And we found in some cases, especially if there's connectivity questions between the place where the report's getting generated and the place where it's being consumed, you can have a lot of extra time there. We've seen cases where the report itself, these are like the ones in question are like material tags, so very small footprint reports were taking 18 seconds to generate. And this was because of a single second to generate, but 17 seconds to get the file back to the client and present it. So that would be, if you're troubleshooting, one area to try to look and see, is that where some of that kind of hidden latency is, because that ends up not being a SQL issue as much as it is, Daryl, you can correct me, a network connectivity and data transfer issue.
Absolutely. Yeah, we see, depending on how the client is connected to the server, and those latencies will absolutely impact the performance of everything. Reports is certainly one of those. Well, thanks for the question. Any others?
We do have one. Does Estes have anyone with experience with EDA with both with sync scripts and EDA database building in the UI.
EDA, so this would be Epicor Data Analytics. Yes, I got a couple of folks who've done some work there. I could certainly circle back around and talk about that some more.
Yep. And then the next question, what is the best way to keep new work from falling into your firm planning window?
Firm planning window. Daryl, I'll let you take that one.
Well, perhaps you can qualify. What do you
I'm
mean
kidding.
by
It's a manufacturing question.
Oh, I'm muting now.
Okay, so I guess, well, the first thing in terms of, if I'm understanding what you're saying, firm plan window, you're probably speaking of a situation where you have a time period from the current day outward X number of days where you're manufacturing kind of a fixed schedule and you're not allowing anything else to enter that period. And that's a pretty common problem with customers. Epicor sometimes just starts throwing stuff willy-nilly, especially if you're in a infinite capacity environment. So I guess the first thing I would look to think and ask, are your resources in the areas in question finitely scheduled? That would be sort of your first pass to getting stuff prioritized so that you can be pushing work outwards from the current day, and then assigning the appropriate work the necessary priority from a scheduling priority standpoint so that new work would hit that and then subsequently back out based on the scheduling priority that you'd see there. Joe, you did some work with scheduling priorities and that and the scheduling engine. Anything else to add there?
I'll find the mute button. I have done some work with that. I'm not sure I have a whole lot to add functional wise. The priorities, but take some setup. I'm not sure what I have to add today.
No worries.
All right, any other questions? Yep. Any recommendations for how to best keep your SQL logs from getting too big?
Absolutely. So the first thing to know is that your SQL transaction logs need to be backed up on a regular basis. When they get backed up, then they get truncated. And truncated is actually just a virtual flag that's put in the file that says anything from this time before can be used again. So it creates white space in the transaction log. Doesn't actually make the transaction log smaller physically on the disk. So the first thing you want to do is back up your transaction logs regularly. And what you will find is that the frequency of backup is going to dictate about the average size of that log file. If that log file keeps getting really, really big, then you're either not backing up your transaction logs frequently enough, or you have long-running transactions that even though they can get backed up, they still hang out in the transaction log until the transaction is completed. So long-running transactions and infrequent transaction log backups will make that log file grow and grow and grow. Also, if you're doing replication, if you're replicating your database using the SQL replication tool, delays in that replication will cause the transaction log to grow. That also includes the always-on availability groups. So if you have those turned on and they're not healthy, your logs will grow with a backlog of transactions to send to your other replicas. But in general, your transaction log should kind of achieve stasis and then hang out there based on how your transaction time and your frequency of transaction log backup. Absolutely happy to take a look at that in more detail if you want to.
Thank you, Daryl. All right, next question. We are a finite capacity site. Our product generally takes about 30 days to complete. What should our finite schedule be in days?
Okay, so finite window in days. I'd say that would be relative to your production calendar. So if your finite window would be, you'd want that to be as many days as to capture your production calendar plus your to capture that window. I think that's when I'm thinking about how that setup would be. So it would be greater than 30 days to catch weekends and such if you're not working over the weekends.
All right, thank you much.
Working over the weekend.
What's a weekend?
Okay. Next question I see here. When is it advisable to add indexes and how often do you need to re-index? So great question. Adding indexes is only needed when the queries that you are running regularly are too slow. Adding an index is great for queries, but it doesn't, it hurts when you add or update data. So adding an index is a double-edged sword. Be careful when you do it. That's why we test first to make sure it actually improves performance. It's not going to corrupt your data, but you could actually slow things down by adding too many indexes. How often do you re-index is a function of how much data changes and what that churn is, and this thing called a fill factor. So when you create an index in Epicor or in any database, it creates white space. And the default fill factor for an Epicor database is fill the page 90% full, which leaves 10% white space, which means that you can add 10% more data to your database without fragmenting. And as soon as you fragment, that's when your performance stops to drop in using that index. So if you have a fill factor of 10%, which is the default, then your database can get about 10% bigger before you have to re-index. Now, that's a really hard number to ascertain because each table is slightly different, right? Some tables get added quickly. Some tables aren't added to once the system is set up. So typically what I recommend is a re-index depending on how long it takes. It could be a weekend process or it could be a month-end process. I do have some clients because a re-index through the Ola Hollengren script that I mentioned only takes about 6 minutes. They do it every night. Just so that the databases are nice and ready for the following day. So it really depends on how quickly you fragment, and that can be determined by a number of different tools to look at the fragmentation levels and see where they stand versus after reindex and how long do they take to fragment again. Good question.
All right, next question. What's easier, consolidating demand links through the job manager or batching jobs through the resource scheduling board?
Okay, well, that's a fun one. Okay, so I'm assuming that you're talking about a situation where you want to reduce the number of total jobs that are flowing through your factory, which is a totally understandable kind of activity. The fewer jobs you have to work with, the less noise potentially in the system. Now, I would say, so this is job manager versus batching. I would say the most successful uses of batching I've seen have been when you have products that aren't the same parts, but are roughly similar. So similar product flowing through the factory at the same time, and you're looking to try and run them as a batch. This might be in cases where you're doing like order-based scheduling, where you have a sales order with a whole bunch of similar products that you want to run through at the same time, because obviously they're all going to ship at the same time. Batching is really nice for that. Job manager does a similar sort of thing, because ultimately a job with a bunch of demand links is really what a batch job is, right? You get batches all those jobs together, consolidates a whole bunch of demand links onto a single job so that they can all get processed and shipped accordingly. With a job manager, you're more working on kind of a part-by-part basis. So there, your best bet is really if you have a lot of make-to-order items that you want to process at the same time. Epicor is really tunnel visioned, right? It'll look at something and say, if it's make direct, I don't care what's going on in the rest of the world. I'm just going to make this thing. So one, it won't look for inventory to use instead. Two, it won't look to consolidate with other jobs that are flowing through at the same time for the same part, which can be frustrating. So really there, I think, is where you can have some benefits from the job manager, looking at a part-by-part basis and looking to consolidate jobs with common parts with different demand links and pulling those together into a single job. I'd say that's pretty successful there. Now, if you're not in a make to order world, There's another thing you can be doing out of the gate, and that is on the part plant, looking to use the days of supply field. That's a field that says, I'm going to look at my demand in buckets according to how many days I've entered in the days of supply field. And then the system will start from today and just look out in these sections, and it'll look to create a single job for any of the same parts that fall into that window, that days of supply window. And that's really helpful, because then you get, if you have something, you're going to make it on Tuesday and you're going to make it on Thursday, but really you want one run per week of that same part, it'll look, and if you have 5 days of supply, it'll lump that into a single week period there, and you can process that from MRP as a single job without any additional fiddling. So I'd say that's probably one of the better tools out there, and quite often one of the underutilized capabilities.
All right, we have another one. What's the best way to consolidate subcontract operations to negotiate better pricing? Same operations, same resource group, just many different parts that have to get outsourced, all going to the supplier at the same time. Would batching work, or is there a better solution?
Okay, and I'm assuming here they're going to be all going out at the same time. I would say probably, I would say that batching is really your only option there. If you're going to look, because you can batch, what do they call it? Batch forward or batch backward. So you can have a job that runs, and then at a certain spot, you choose to batch all of these ongoing. And that could be your spot there, your subcontract activity, especially if that's truly the final activity of the job. That's kind of a handy way of doing that, where you would batch forward. Let's assume that you're sending a product out to get powder coated. So you have a whole bunch of parts that they're weldments, they get fabricated inside, and then they all need to get batched forward for powder coating. Then they come back, and by the time they come back, now they're ready to be used in a subsequent operation. I would say that's probably the best way of, from a job standpoint, keeping everything together. In terms of getting it all into the same PO from a pricing standpoint, even if you weren't batching, I imagine you'd be looking to do something to the degree of how are you filtering your purchase suggestion information to pull all of those in at once so that you can create a single PO for that. I think that would be the key there, is trying to figure out if there's like a quick search or something that you build on top of PO suggestions so that you can pull in accordingly. We've done some automation with some customers in taking PO suggestions and batching them so that you create a single purchase order for a certain subset of information that shares commonalities. In our case, it wasn't specifically a subcontract, but the same, I think, general principle would apply, is that you'd want to try to figure out what's a way of taking that data coming in that I can sort and filter it and plug that all into a single area with a little bit of smarts.
All right, any other questions?
Is the session being recorded? I got that one. That's an easy one. Yes.
Yep, so if, like I said at the beginning, and if you came in late, I'll say it again, we will record this, and we will have links to each session as well. So if there's one that you missed, you don't have to kind of scroll through. We'll have those sort of blocked out for you. So just let us know. You can reach out to me directly, or just anyone. So feel free to let us know. And again, we have a few more minutes. If you have any other questions, we can hang around for 8 more minutes, kind of see what comes in. But thank you all so much for being here. Was there anything else that anyone else wanted to add? Daryl, Joe, Brad?
So I wanted to add that all of the demonstrations that you saw today were brought to you by EstesCloud Managed Hosting. Both Joe and Brad were working in our Echo environment, so the response times that you saw were indicative of what you would expect to see. And now this is our demo environment, so we have it's scaled appropriately for just demonstration. We can certainly talk to you more about what that would look like for your organization. So just heads up, these guys did not have Epicor installed on their local laptops.
Daryl, we did get,
I was just going to follow up that I'm actually working from a hotel per the drapes, so couldn't even keep it going.
It's calm in the back. Daryl, can you give a little bit more information on our data center locations?
Sure. So our data center is our primary data center, I should say, is in Grand Rapids, Michigan, where the cooling is cheap and we don't have to worry about tornadoes as much. And we also mirror, as I mentioned, we do a block replication of our SQL databases and application servers over to Detroit. So we have a warm data center in Detroit. And what's nice about those is that they are, we have multiple connections to the backbone internet. So latency across the nation is very, very low. Also, we're a US-based data center. And by default, we block all out-of-country traffic. So we don't have to worry about a lot of the silly internet hacking that's going on overseas. Unless you are an Echo customer that requires a client overseas to be able to get in, we just block all of that. And believe it or not, that gets rid of 90% of the silly traffic, attacking traffic that we're seeing out there on the internet.
All right. And we did have another question come in. When modifying custom reports, is there any limit to how many tables you can add before the thing blows up?
Joe, should we defer to you on that?
Custom tables, we're talking about on an existing report, or, well, the thing's going to be the same if we add a table on an existing report. There is a query that goes along with it. You saw an example of that in our session. It was a simple query. It was just on company and plant on this one table. You can make those pretty complicated. I've not run into a number of an issue with the number of tables on a report, but the complexity of the report and the volume you get back can be an issue. And what kind of table you connect. For example, connecting in the order report, if we connect order detail, which is not in that, or order release, which is not in the report, to order detail, we have to watch out for multiple releases skewing the data and running the total up. So it's got to do with more with the query, whether it's whether we change an existing report or we write a brand new BAQ report. It's all in the query and how efficient it is and how much data we try to shovel through it. Hope that answers the question.
Yeah, I agree. I don't think there's a top limit to it. I mean, there's probably some upper limit, 256 tables in one join, but I strongly suspect you'll run across a headache and trying to just keep the logic together before you run out of to a hard-coded limit of how many tables can be involved in a join to be able to get a report generated. Although I do see a lot of issues when it comes to those complex joins. Clients will join two tables together, I don't want to say loosey-goosey, and return a whole lot more data than they're expecting. That's one of the reasons I recommend that you write reports on a test environment, so that if you write a bad report, your SSRS doesn't go to 100% and everybody goes, oh, Epicor's down. And that's where a test server is helpful, SQL Server, SSRS server. However, yeah, proper report writing is absolutely an art, because it does really, I've seen the most powerful servers brought to their knees because of bad queries.
Well, if report writing's an art, most of my queries look like Jackson Pollock, so just a big splatter. Any more? Any more questions before we cut out here, folks?
Looks like it might be it.
That's all she wrote. Well, thanks again for being here, and you know where to find us if you need anything, any recordings, any work, etc. So, or a sounding board, whatever it is. Thanks again.
All right. Thank you. Take care,
Thanks, folks.
All right, be safe out there. Don't forget to back up.